Not that one though.
Yes. So, welcome everybody. Happy Friday. So, we have some cool stuff lined up for y'all today. We're going to do things that are a little bit different. So, today we're going to be giving y'all a quick stakeholder update about HG. So, I don't quite know what that means, but Kruti does. And so, we're going to be talking to y'all about some of the stuff that we've been doing here. I think generally speaking, people appreciate it when we give y'all updates about stuff. So, we're going to be doing that. Next thing is that we're going to be doing a performance review. So we're going to show you all the actual template that we use, and I think we're going to make it a little bit interactive. So we have chat opened up. And so, as we go through the different things, y'all are welcome to weigh in on, whether I get a 1 to a 6 and whatever comments y'all have. This is a great chance for feedback. So we're gonna actually go through like a performance review. Like so, these are the documents we use internally. And then what we're gonna do towards the end, or I guess maybe we wanted to leave a lot of time for this, is a lot of people have questions about performance reviews. Hey, what should I do in a performance review? We're gonna be looking at a couple of cases, things that we pull from Reddit. And then if y'all have questions about performance reviews and stuff in general, how do I do X? How do I do Y? How do I do Z? We can go through that. So Kruti has done a ton of performance reviews as the reviewer, and I'm sure she's had a fair number of performance reviews as an employee. I too have done both. So in the medical system and residency, we get performance reviews basically on every rotation. So that's a big part of rotations, is you basically get a performance
What is this? Is this botting or something?
Resident, you start reviewing medical students, and you get reviewed by senior residents and attendings. And then once you become
I deserve this.
Review everyone downstream, and then
easiest
by people upstream.
Easiest. I wonder if this happens the first time. Is this like fake accounts put up in ranked mode? Yeah, I deserve those 2 wins. Definitely deserved it. Do they know that I want to cannon rush? Again, very similar account. It should be a bot. Probably a bot. They will instantly quit, right? Not instantly? Okay. Do we have a game on our hands? Or maybe the bot wants some variety in that it will actually play some? Weird. Maybe it's not the bot? Weird either way. Ooh.
Our pylon is under attack.
Yeah, that's cool.
is under attack. You have
Ooh, nice. Okay, we have a game. Nice. He evened it up here. Against Protoss, Cannon Rush is kind of good. I'm just training Cannon Rush to understand it better. So I can counteract it someday. Maybe. He is cannon rushing me. Okay, that's fun. Actually, I don't care about the cannon.
My life for hire. Justice be done. Adam Aporin, my meditation is over. My life for hire.
It's actually pretty good by him. Did not expect that. He's ahead, for sure. Pretty stupid though. Anyway.
My life for hire. Justice. I'm here in the shadows. You have not enough minerals. You have not enough minerals. You have not enough minerals. I'm here. Not enough energy. Not enough. You require more Vespine gas. You must construct additional pylons. Upgrade. Highlight for iron. You must construct additional pylons. Not enough energy. You have not enough minerals. You must construct additional pylons. You have not enough minerals. I am here in the shadows. You must. Mineral field depleted. Not enough energy. Not enough energy. You have not enough minerals. Mineral field depleted. You have not enough mineral. Mineral field depleted. You have not enough minerals. You have not enough minerals. You have not enough. Research complete.
Oracle perceiving.
Upgrade. Mineral field upgrade.
An Eldeen Washagal.
I am here in the shadows.
I see.
Nice.
You must construct additional pylons. I am here in the shadows.
Funny.
I return to serve. I return to serve. Carrier has arrived. Base is under attack. You must construct additional mineral field. Upgrade complete. Mineral field depleted. You must construct additional pocket. Upgrade mineral field depleted. Mineral field depleted. Mineral field unacceptable command.
I am here in the shadows. Very well. It shall be as you...
We are ready. The battle is won. Carrier has arrived. I return to serve.
Ja. That was idiotic by me.
Mineral base is under attack. Our pylon is under attack. I return to serve. You must place that in a power. Your probes are under attack.
Okay. Ah, idiotic game by me. Yes. Should have just attacked their main base, I guess. They did get a relatively decent start with that. 3 pylons and 1 cannon.
And then also in my capacity here at HG, once in a blue moon, I'll do a performance review. So, yeah.
Nice.
I think we can get started.
Is it
Kruti, did you
Dr.
wanna
K's
start with,
curse? Like, will I win every time I'm
Hi.
listening
My
to
name is
Dr.
Kruti
K?
Kanogia. I am Mrs. K.
Immediately?
And I run the Healthy Gamer organization, which includes Healthy Gamer content coaching community, but also the HG Institute and the Healthy Gamer
But-
Foundation. So we have a really incredible team here.
This doesn't seem to be a bot.
And performance is, just kind of a part of life in
Protoss,
the
though.
workspace, and we try to keep ours as human as possible. But a lot of you guys work at maybe less human places, so what we're trying to do today is, one, show you a little bit about what we've been up to, two, talk a little bit through a performance review in like a real world setting, and then three, go through some everyday struggles and challenges that we see on the career side from our community, and just kind of help you guys get good at work.
Okay, so do you want to do the stakeholder stuff first, or do you want to do the Let's do stakeholder stuff first?
Sure.
Okay. So let me go ahead and...
So the whole kind of premise of Healthy Gamer is you guys are the board or the investors or the stakeholders, really. We're in a very privileged position, I would say, of most mental health companies have to take money from venture capital, private equity, personal capital, but essentially those mental health companies are really there to make money for their stakeholders. And we're lucky enough to basically be able to say, hey, we're not here to like make buckets of money. We're here to spread as much impact as we can. The AOE part is so core to every decision we make, everything that we build. So we just thought we would close the loop and kind of show you how and why we're doing the things that we do. Any questions, let us know. We've got both Twitch and YouTube chats over here, and this is really to give you guys information that you want about what we're doing.
That's weird. That worked pretty well for a second. Hold on.
No worries. There we go.
Keyboard shortcuts, no like. Okay. Yeah.
And we did, this is also the reward for the Make It community event from May, and May is always buckets of fun over here, so sorry it took us so long to get to this. We took a little break after May. May's like our Christmas, so June, July is when the team usually takes a little bit of a break.
Oh god. Someone is mentioning Goon Coin. Alright, that'll come up.
The first thing that we wanted to...
That's a good
First
start.
thing that we wanted to do is make sure you guys knew about this. So about 2 years ago, the Board of Medicine, the Board of Registration in Medicine of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts started an investigation into Alec as a physician, which then expanded to everything that we do at Healthy Gamer. And we wanted to kind of update you on where everything landed. So they went through a bunch of stuff. It's all on public record, or most of it is. A lot of the back and forth is off record, but we don't have to get into that. And we wanted to kind of tell you guys, make sure you understand that it happened, that it's concluded, that the findings are really twofold. So publicly, Alec's license technically has been reprimanded. This is a disciplinary action, which means that, like, in no uncertain terms, this was something that shouldn't have happened. And basically what it's saying is the thing that shouldn't have happened is the undermining of the public's confidence in the profession of psychiatry. So we get it, we accept it, and I think the thing that we've really taken to heart is there are so many improvements we can make in the way that we do content that we started making years before this complaint even came to light. So in the sense that, yes, there was something that shouldn't have happened, that we did something wrong, we accept it, take responsibility. We've made, I think, all the changes that we can make from a process point of view, from like a oversight point of view, yeah, just all the substantial
Yes, but-
changes a person can make, we've made.
So just to jump in, so I think you know, I see there's a lot of positive comments in chat. You know, one person, Turtlebite, is saying, "I found you guys so much more helpful than actual psychiatrists or therapists. Why is this?" So I think, like Ruki said, the reprimand is for undermining the public's faith in the profession, which I think is fair. So the reprimand refers to 6 streams that we did between 2019 and 2020, and I think that some of those streams can look bad. And I think that the other thing to keep in mind is that, you know, some of the actions that we take, some people will be happy with and some people will be unhappy with. I think that on the whole, the number of positive responses, like just like this comment today that we've gotten, far outweigh. I think we've helped far more people than have lost faith in psychiatry because of what we do, which is what the reprimand is for. We make psychiatrists look bad. So I think on balance, like what we're doing, I think is helping people, and I think we see this, right? So the scope of the board is not necessarily to look at all of the positive, but just to focus on a particular set of things.
I think that's an important point, that like they're not going to be handing out blue ribbons. So
Yeah.
for one instance where something did not look good, that's fair game to basically call it out and say, nope, can't do that. One thing that is equally important is when it comes to the private interactions with Reckful, who, you know, was kind of near and dear to everything Healthy Gamer, that all of the private interactions there did follow the standard referral guidelines. And the reason that you guys are just hearing about this now is because this is all private. This is all closed door investigation, and there's just, it's going through private communications, and there's just, we just want to kind of take everybody's privacy seriously. So unfortunately, we have had to kind of like let our names be dragged through the mud a little bit, but it kind of is what it is. And I think we're all kind of ready to just, did you want to say something before I say we're going to
No, I mean, I think that the main thing to understand is that, so, you know, one of the things that we value a lot is privacy. And so as a result of that, you know, we don't talk about people, we talk to people, and we try not to talk about people like publicly in general. And so another thing to understand about the board complaint is that they went through everything, right? So, and they did not find any evidence of malpractice or negligence or anything like that. So, and I know that that may upset people, but basically the board found, and you guys can read this yourself, that I acted within standard referral guidelines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I know it's kind of weird that we're bringing this up, but I think if y'all hadn't heard about this, I think it's important to know. We take this kind of stuff super seriously. I think the board process was ultimately incredibly fair. And the good news is that there are no restrictions on my license, thankfully, no probation or anything like that. And then also, like, no changes to the work that we do at Healthy Gamer, which was actually the most important thing. So the board did not recommend that we stop doing anything, change doing anything like that. So the good news is that after this whole process, we're here. It seems like we're here to stay, at least for now. And I also want to emphasize that this is how things work, right? We have these institutions, we have these systems of oversight to make sure that everything is okay. So overall, I think it's like a healthy part of the process, and this is why these things like medical boards exist.
Yeah. So with that said, I think we have kind of full confidence moving forward that our processes look good, our oversight looks good, and our content, most of all, is helping you guys. I see you guys in chat saying that you've gotten help because of this, or that you've been working with a coach because of this, and you've made improvements. So we're just kind of here to wish you guys well and keep building on top of everything that we've done. All right, let's move to the next.
Yeah.
So, you know, most mental health things happen not on open platforms like Twitch and YouTube, Discord, etc. So the combination of content plus coaching plus community is new for mental health on open platforms. So that's why we want to be super transparent on what we're building, how we're building it, and why. Because ultimately, we're building this for you guys. And if you guys don't like it, if you don't like the foundation of it, if you have questions about it, then we want to know. And we want to kind of do it better so that way it actually helps you. Alright, cool. Next. So, I don't know if you guys are aware, but one thing that kind of was part of this process of improvement was creating a scientific advisory board. We realized pretty quickly, like Healthy Gamer was never supposed to work, right? Like Healthy Gamer was all oak streaming in between like patients, basically. When he was doing a private practice and somebody would cancel, he would pop on Twitch, or if he would have an open afternoon, he would pop on Twitch. It was infrequent and it was kind of extemporaneous. And then as that started picking up, especially post-pandemic, we realized, hey, we need a little bit more advice on how to do this, because he's a psychiatrist, but are there psychologists that can add their perspective? Are there coaches that can add their perspective? What do other psychiatrists think about this? So we work with a really great group. I'm going to sing their praises for just a second, but Dr. Comrade, who some of you guys might have met, he is a pretty well-known ethicist with the American Psychiatric Association, so he lends a lot of kind of ethical perspectives and kind of more of like a conservative psychiatrist point of view. Dr. Michael Shu is another kind of MGA, was he MGH?
Brigham.
He was Brigham. So he came out of the Harvard systems as well. He is, he's a great guy, because he will go with Olive from the APA to the Crunchyroll office, and we will have to track them both down, because he's kind of one of us in a lot of ways, and he's also heavier on the research side. So he brings a great research perspective, a community perspective, and a psych perspective. Dr. Bailey is awesome. She comes out of children's mental health, so she was at Nationwide Children's in Cleveland. So that adolescent perspective as I think she's a PhD psychologist. She might be a PsyD. I get those kind of mixed up sometimes. But as like, you know, a doctoral level psychologist, she brings a lot of integrity. She also works with very, like, the most serious cases. So the dark, heavy stuff, she's a great point of view there. Dr. Y played competitive WoW actually with Red Bull. So again, she's like one of us. She started working with us, doing a lot of case review with our coaches. So she supported Healthy Gamer coaches to make sure that coaches were in scope, that they, you know, had good support for, like, okay, if somebody is coming in and they have a lot of trauma, make sure that the coach can handle what the coach is supposed to handle, but never go out of scope. Dr. Thorderson is great. She's a clinical psychologist with a background in, you're gonna have to help me with the terminology here. She runs an inpatient.
No, so she runs an IOP,
Nice.
which is funny because someone just posted, I think on our subreddit or something, about like IOPs and talking about IOPs. So she's great at program development. I think she's really good at working with like teenagers who have. So she runs an IOP, which is an intensive outpatient program. So she works with like high acuity teenagers to young adults. And so intensive outpatient, so when we normally think about there's like inpatient treatment, right, where you're hospitalized and you're spending the night at the hospital. And then there's outpatient treatment, which is usually like one appointment a week for about an hour. And then there's a really good step between those two things, which are, these things are not super popular because they're resource intense, but something called an intensive outpatient program. So my experience with IOPs is usually around addictions. So when someone gets discharged from, you know, a hospital after getting detoxed, if they have 1 hour of therapy a week, that may not be enough to help them stay sober. So IOPs can be like half-day programs, like 3 days a week, or they can be like, 3 hours, 3 days a week, or they can be like 3 to 4 hours, 5 days a week. There are different structures to it. So it's intensive outpatient, so you don't have to stay at the hospital. You're not like locked up or anything like that. And at the same time, you are getting a lot of like kind of, more intense psychiatric care and support.
She also brings a perspective from a lived experience, as kind of self-disclosing that she is neurodivergent. So we love that as well, to make sure that we can really effectively shape our solutions to be, if not explicitly supportive, then at least accommodating for neurodivergent needs. And then Coach Emmy Marie, she is also a creator, and she is a trauma-informed coach. So again, when we're talking about processes and protocols around the coaching program, this group between an ethical or an ethicist, a psychiatrist, somebody that understands youth mental health, somebody that understands gaming culture, somebody that understands intensive situations, somebody that understands coaching. We love working with this group. Just wanted you to know that there are bones to what we do that isn't just like all-organized harebrained schemes. And our goal is really to start connecting the healthy gamer community with more of the best and brightest in mental health. I think as we kind of keep growing, we want to bring more diverse perspectives and diverse kind of takes. So that way, if something that we're saying isn't quite matching with what you guys are seeking, we can at least connect you guys with something that will. Yeah, Dr. Matu, I thought, nailed it. We have some more kind of fun people coming your way.
That's hilarious. Dr. Matu is in chat right now.
Hey!
And he's saying hello. And I just absolutely loved, we did a stream earlier this week about anxiety, and Dr. Matu's perspective is so amazing. Having lived through stuff like selective mutism and working through his own social anxiety, and then like he's an expert in he's an expert in anxiety. So he's done a ton of clinical practice and also makes content about it. So he's an excellent educator. He's an excellent educator, an excellent clinician, and what seems to be a great human being. But I'd have to hang out with him a little bit more to be able to really say that.
Looking forward to all of it.
And then
by, Dr.
he was also wearing a Street Fighter TMNT shirt, so we don't know exactly how good he is at games anymore. But it was and is one of us. Oh, today's something related to DS9. DS9 is great. Okay.
All right, this was a big lift, and shout out to Jake, our research manager here at Healthy Gamer. We do a lot of content, as you guys know, and every piece of content basically goes through this process of hey, somebody in chat or somebody commented or somebody sent an email.
This is way above my pay grade.
And then from that, our team will say,
I think,
oh, what a great question. We should make a video about this. And then what we'll do is say, all right, let's find the underlying science here. So Alec will do a research request. Jake will pull the studies, Alec will sit down with them, kind of start bulleting it out. He'll work with the content team to kind of figure out a script. He'll record. And unfortunately, throughout this process, the research has never made it into the links in the description or into bibliography or anything.
Yeah, so it's crazy, like how some of the things that seem the simplest and honestly are simple and are not that hard, are just like hard to implement sometimes. I think it's like, you guys have been wanting citations for a long time. We should have been doing citations. We do a whole lot of research on the back end. So a stopgap that we have is we have a citations page where it's topic based. So another thing that changes a little bit with the way that I do videos is that I don't like, it's not like an academic like bibliography, right? So it's not like every sentence I every sentence that I say has a citation associated with it. So as I read more and more and more, it kind of like I draw on studies that I may not have like looked at specifically for that particular lecture. So I think we're still shooting to do both. And a lot of people have brought up citations. It's absolutely on our radar. We'll fix citations once Dota 2 fixes the Midas bug. And once that gets taken care of, if a multi-billion-dollar company doesn't, if a multi-billion-dollar company can't fix a Midas bug, give us some time for dealing with the citations, okay? And let me just pull that up. Hold on 1 second. You can see. So we hope to actually update both. So what we have here, if y'all want to take a look, is we have, so here are our citations for anxiety. So this looks like it's been updated recently. Here's our citations for depression, ADHD, meditation, trauma, post-traumatic growth, and then we also have, like, we're starting to implement these where, so this normally would belong like in our, you know, like various videos, but the challenge is that, like, when we talk, our videos are a little bit multidisciplinary. And so what that means is that, you know, for example, like in the gooning video, which we talked about recently, there's not like a bibliography specifically for gooning, but we'll talk about coping mechanisms, we'll talk about attachment styles, we'll talk about neuroscience. So usually when we ask people, why do y'all want citations? It's because, okay, I want to read more about a particular topic. So we're working on including them in the video descriptions, but then there's a lot of stuff that is like, we may not have a video about time blindness. It'll be like a piece of a video, but a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to learn more about that. So, you know, like this, for example, is a fantastic paper. Time perception in adult ADHD, just the way that the ADHD brain perceives time is different. So this is not necessarily related to ADHD. Psychopathy in women, we have a video coming out soon. Asking for help, dark side of empathy, male mental health, male suicide, neuroscience of addiction recovery, neuroscience of acceptance, cognitive bias and depression, habit formation, male social phobia, autism in women, dopamine resistance, addiction in women, acceptance, sex addiction, ADHD in women, neuroscience of willpower, food cravings, therapy for ADHD, sleep, CPTSD, dissociation, jealousy, anhedonia, cultivating interest, right? So this is another thing that I don't know if this is like, so we'll find a lot of cool papers that are a little bit more topical as opposed to in a particular video. Marijuana avoidance, bipolar 2, gentle parenting. This one is something we're working on.
Nope, that's in a P.
Huh?
That's in a P. Go. Paternal.
Oh, paternal, okay. Need for social interaction, right? So this is like some of the stuff that went into our... so the other thing is sometimes we'll do research before we do a live stream. So on a live stream, right, we may not have a clear bibliography because it'll be like someone will ask a question and then I'll answer it. This is really fascinating segment of research. Brain rot, ADHD and obesity, stalking, neuroscience of satiety. This is a video that never actually saw the light of day, but that also happens quite a bit. Dreams and PTSD, loss aversion, cognitive barriers to exercise. So we hope to update this. This just got a big update. And you know, there's a ton of papers here.
Ooh. Okay, so the main takeaway there is the videos all build on each other. So the video doesn't have a clear, I'm talking about this paper, but the Healthy Gamer body of knowledge includes those citations as well as like tons of books that are all around this office. So
link is right here, explore.healthygamer.gg/citations. Okay. What is it? You want to talk about this?
Sure. Your guide got a makeover. Our guide, the guide, got a makeover. So, for those of you that have been with us for a little while, you probably remember, I think, was it 2021 or 2022?
You kind of suck at this.
Where we decided basically that there's so much content out there from Healthy Gamer that now it's hard. And here we are 3 years later, so it's even harder to know where to start and how to kind of go a little bit more methodically. So essentially, Alok said, let's put everything into like a step-by-step guide to mental health. So building on all of this research, right? Like, what is the first thing you need to know about anxiety? What is the first thing you need to know about depression? What is the second thing, the third thing? So the guides have gone through a huge makeover, both just the UI and like the fundamental structure. So it used to be kind of skill tree based, where it was about the different kind of paths that you go down. And now it's much more about a learning path that can kind of draw from the different modules altogether. It's kind of hard to describe, so maybe
I would actually say that it's more
No, I
skill
lost
tree
it.
based now.
it's more clearly skill tree based
So-
now. So you can see like there's different learning paths where if you wanted to go down, this is from the
That was a
meditation
shit
manual as
game
an
by me.
example.
I should have
So
just
there's
boomed the
do you
gateway
wanna take them
since
through this?
held that place.
Yeah, so
I had
I'll
such
give
a
you all-
good opportunity
okay.
to.
So here's what
Whatever.
I want to do. Okay. So in video games, we have these things like skill trees. So you can look at your skill tree. They're all the domains of mastery, right? So it's like, I'm gonna level up my defensive tree. I'm gonna level up my dodging tree. I'm gonna level up fire magic. I'm gonna level up dual wielding daggers. I'm gonna level up conversation skills. I'm gonna level up passives. I'm gonna give myself plus 50 HP, plus a 10% mana regen. So if you look at these video games, right, what they do a really good job of saying, okay, if you want to make the perfect character, here are all of the things that you need to invest in. And you can max out your skill tree, right? So in some games, they give us a limited number of points, so you have to choose to specialize. But if you look at real life, every day you exist on this planet, you can gain XP and level something up. So remember that the mind doesn't wear out. We don't max out. It's not like our brain fills up at some point and we can no longer learn new things. What causes us to forget is not overwriting old information. What causes us to forget is not using something. So if I like learn Spanish and then I don't use it for 10 years, it's not like Spanish gets replaced by another language. It gets replaced through a lack of use. So one of the key things to understand about the human body and the human mind is that they never wear out, they rust. So then I thought to myself, okay, I've been like, I saw my first patient somewhere around 2010 when I started med school. It's been 14 years since I saw my first patient. And as I've worked with people who are addicted to stuff, including pornography, substances, as I've worked with people who like lack happiness in life, are professionally successful but don't know how to date, are professionally successful, have a family but feel trapped at the age of 45 and are going through a midlife crisis. What I started to do is think about, okay, what is the skill tree for life? Like what do I think, what have I observed that human beings need? And then what we tried to do is build. So now, like, it started out kind of like the FF10 sphere grid, if you're all are familiar with that. But then as we've grown, like, the sphere grid is getting way too far away from FF10 and way too close to PoE. And the Path of Exile skill tree is just ridiculous. Like, it's just not, you have to spend, there's a whole separate part of a skill tree, which is understanding the Path of Exile skill tree, which you have to invest in. So now what we've tried to do is really break it down to where, like, okay, if you like want to learn about yourself and like what are the core skills you need to understand, like this is how we want to bake this out for y'all. So things like, okay, people will ask, I saw a question on the meditation subreddit today, what is my mind? If I'm not my thoughts, then what am I? So that's like a core understanding of like, once you understand you're not your thoughts, it helps a lot, whether you're hallucinating or you have something like black and white thinking with like borderline personality disorder. How does trauma affect us? How does the mind gain knowledge? What are the roots of suffering? Why is it that money doesn't buy happiness? So money buys security. Security removes some of the sources of unhappiness, absolutely. But where does unhappiness come from? So how can we take action without fearing the potential outcome, right? So how do we like get over things like analysis paralysis and stuff like that? So we've tried to develop this into like basically like skill-based things that if you want to learn about yourself, go through this stuff. The other thing is that these are clinically a little bit focused, but there's a lot of stuff in trauma about how your identity is formed, like where self-esteem comes from. So it's not just clinical. So ADHD has a lot of stuff about time management and planning your day and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed with like where to start. There's so many videos. Do I have to do all of this? So the learning paths are really kind of goal oriented. Where are you? Where do you want to be? What do you need to learn in the way? And it'll take you through a more discrete learning path throughout all of the content. Will you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So that's the guide. It's really exciting, and I see some of you saying like you bought it a while ago and it was so overwhelming you kind of did 1% and clicked off. I would love for you to kind of refresh and see if this experience is a little bit stronger for you, and also it's like more mobile friendly, or you can Chromecast it, so all of that feature and functionality is there. Let's see. Our design team put together some really cute little characters, and what we're trying to communicate here is that a lot of these resources are made with a ton of love from the full Healthy Gamer team. So Healthy Gamer has a product team, research, design, development, marketing, community, and then of course like the back of house, like finance, HR, all of that good stuff. So it's kind of like a full rounded operation now. And so you've got, with the oversight of the advisory board, a really great team building tons of stuff for you guys. So some of it's for fun, some of it's for connection, some of it's for growth, some of it is to like tailor a mental health learning experience, some of it is more action oriented. So if you guys have any ideas for these characters, we really want to keep making more of these and just kind of make it all a little bit more fun.
Yeah, so I just want to...
You hate the couch bird. I am the couch bird. That bird is me.
Someone's saying, Caden's saying that love the guide after being in therapy for over 15 years. This helps my gifted kid brain process and fill in a lot of the holes and pitfalls. So that's honestly the reason we started this. Right, so what I was sitting in my office and I was thinking that what I would love is if my patients could, there's like a lot of DIY stuff that I don't need to teach them in my office, right? They're like books they can read, but the problem is that like those resources just weren't what I wanted for my patients to go through. So like if they could understand, you know, what is the nature of like dopamine resistance and tolerance, what is the nature of you know, pornography addiction. Like there's a lot of stuff. This generation, if you look at this digital generation, we are the most DIY oriented generation. We're also the most informed generation. So there are like certain advantages that we don't take advantage, we really don't like capitalize on in the field of medicine, which is that patients are like the best advocates for themselves. Like the number of doctors that get pissed off when a patient comes in and says, oh, like I was reading about this on the internet, this is what I think I have. I've heard so many horror stories of patients being right and doctors being wrong. And it's like, we take it as a personal affront if you like did some research on your own and learned about your health. Now there's a lot of challenges to that, right? Because what research on the internet means oftentimes is this is what the content algorithm showed me. And that can be a lot of misinformation, a lot of distorted information. So I think there's a reasonable amount of frustration that comes with being a medical professional when everyone is like, I read WebMD and it says that I have glioblastoma multiforme. And it's like, that's exceedingly unlikely. And so there's a balance there. And so our goal, and I think a lot of like medical content creators, like this is our goal. I've talked and worked with a lot of them. I definitely got this vibe from Dr. Matu, is like, we want to equip y'all with what we hope are high quality resources to learn about your mind and your health. And thankfully, we have a lot of awesome people here on the team who help us do that.
Wait, okay, so naming the characters, I love Ravioli for the bird. Somebody called him Midbird, which I think is also kind of a fun name. I love the frog wizard.
I am here in the shadows.
I think we can christen the bird Ravioli.
Okay, so
Wiz for the frog. I think that's cute too. Okie doke. So one thing that we constantly look at that we wanted to kind of share with you guys is we've gone through the 15th cohort of coaches is coming up on the Healthy Gamer coaching platform. And we're constantly looking to see how we can improve the coaching experience. Coaching is tricky because it's unregulated, and there's three kind of concerns around coaching. One is it's unregulated, so anyone can say they're any kind of coach. The second is the scope of coaching and really making sure that coaches have good clarity of scope, that they're not pretending to be therapists, they're not going out of their lane. And the third, for us, because our blend is peer coaching, recovery coaching, and mental health coaching kind of mashed into one program. So we're really looking at efficacy. Like, are people actually getting better? So we have a couple of studies that we run to kind of measure all of this stuff. And the best part of this is our beta cohort launched with a 4.5 out of 5. Oops, sorry. Don't know if it just sounded his ears off. So our beta cohort, which was launched, I think, February 2020, so right before the pandemic, started off with a good kind of like 90% score, 4.5 out of 5. Good, but not kind of where we want to be because we're always shooting for the A+. So we made some improvements, and really happy to say that we've kind of got to 4.89 after 14 rounds of coaches. So cohort 15 is up on the platform now. We have been sold out for 3.5 years of coaching spots. So
quite a pushover as well.
sure.
Or did they just see cause and effect?
Probably more of cause and effect than microbiology, because this is where they also develop something very similar to the theory of humors. So they have like these concepts of
I'm
elements.
familiar.
But the really interesting thing is that what they basically, I think what they did is notice all kinds of correlations and then developed a heuristic system to explain those correlations.
My question is now, is this a radical form of survivorship bias where we're remembering the ones that turned out to be right and are not pointing out the hundreds of correlations that they deemed as cause and effect, and they were magically wrong? Like,
It could be. So now let's get into that. This is great. Okay, so let's look at that in a couple of different ways. So it's absolutely a possibility of survivorship bias. So let's also remember that there are a lot of things in Ayurvedic medicine that are not correct, right? So this is where, and what tends to happen is we don't propagate those. So, and then what ends up happening is a survivorship bias where the stuff from Ayurvedic medicine, like let's say ashwagandha or brahmi or meditation, these are the things that we now associate because we remove things like heavy metals in the usage of medicine. So there's something called Rasa Shastra, in which they'll use things like arsenic, mercury, things like that as treatment. But that is not nearly as popular, but that's absolutely a part of Ayurvedic medicine. So to say that Ayurvedic medicine is right, I think is a gross overgeneralization, because there are 8 branches of Ayurvedic medicine. Some of them have scientific support. Some of them have scientific evidence that they're actually harmful. Now, there's even a counter argument to that, which is that they may have known something about the usage of these chemicals that we don't. So a good example of this is if you go back 60 years ago, and someone shows up and says, hey, you don't need to take an SSRI for your mental illness. You can sit there and meditate. And what would science have said 60 years ago about meditation?
That it's useless.
Absolutely, right? And that's what we did say. And so they figured something out that, based on our modern understanding of biology at the time, was literally useless, was so antithetical to everything that was a revolution in biological psychiatry. We're like, this is complete BS. And we were so confident. And today it turns out that we're grossly wrong about
Well,
meditation.
Yes. But again, are we just pointing out the one time we were wrong and we were actually right the huge majority of the time?
That is what I think makes Western medicine the best. So what makes Western medicine the best is we are the best at pointing out when we're wrong. That's what makes it's.
But that's a scientific method, is it not?
Sure.
That's
So
why
I think
people were mad during COVID that guidelines changed. And it's like, well, because we were pointing out when we were wrong.
So yeah, that's the scientific method. So I think this is the weakness. I helped organize a conference at Harvard a couple of years ago, and one of my mentors was on the panel. And so this is a conference on integrative medicine. So there were a bunch of like Eastern medical practitioners there, and they kind of asked this question. They said, like, what do you think needs to happen for Eastern medicine to be more widely accepted? And my mentor, brilliant guy named John Denninger, said, you guys need to let your treatments fail. The problem is there's such a pissing contest between Western medicine and Eastern medical practitioners that no one on the East is willing to say, yeah, this treatment sucks. So the one thing that we do really, really well, which is I think why allopathic medicine, talking about selection biases, but let's talk about not selection biases the reason that Western medicine is dominated so much is because we are so good at pointing out when our medicine is wrong. So if you look at things like thalidomide, or, like that's such a great example of, oh my God, revolutionary medicine solves nausea. And by the way, we're never going to use it ever again, right? And so we're really good at that. And the biggest problem in Eastern medicine is they are so hung up on getting widespread acceptance. There's this ego battle going on between Eastern medical practitioners and Western medical practitioners that Eastern medical practitioners are not willing to say, oh, hey, by the way, this treatment actually sucks.
Is that because a lot of those treatments are less based on the scientific method and are more culturally based?
So I think they're based on the scientific method, but they don't look at the mechanism in the same way that we do. So if we look at scientific method, what is scientific method? It is having a hypothesis, testing that hypothesis, observing results. So I think they did that. That's not how meditation was developed, which is a whole different conversation about sources of transcendental knowledge and all this good stuff. But they absolutely applied the scientific method. So I don't think that you can develop as robust of a system of medicine. The big difference, though, is that we're really good at instrumentation. So in the West, it's not even technically a part of the scientific method. You can just, a child can make observations, test hypotheses, and come up with conclusions.
I mean, every time a child's learning to walk, that's what they're
Absolutely,
doing.
right? But they don't use a microscope. They don't understand anything about anatomy. So one of the things that I think we've actually mistaken is that in the East, they use the scientific method quite robustly. They just don't use instrumentation. So what they did is figured out all of these correlations and causations and developed these kind of heuristic systems. Even something like the concept of an organ is actually an abstract concept, right? It's not, you can make an argument that there's no such thing as an organ. There's just, everything is just cells.
You can just say that about anything, about a cell.
Yeah, right?
That's like, I feel like Deepak Chopra's main thing is, like, what is HIV? That's a concept that you've created in your mind. It's like, well, wait, hold on a second.
Yeah, so I'm not
I think
quite
it's very
there.
easy to go.
So I think they applied the scientific method, but what they didn't have was good instrumentation to elucidate the mechanisms. Right? So they didn't have microscopes. But they were still able to make observations that when you have a diabetic, they're going to have sugar in the urine, and if you have sugar in the urine, you can test for that by if ants drink your urine.
Right. I think a lot of their scientific method approach is more so finding correlations and things that happen, which can be a form of scientific method and an introductory form of scientific method. But then in order to see if your correlation is valuable, can you affect it? Can you reproduce it? Can you generalize it? That is always missing.
In Eastern medicine?
Yeah.
I disagree.
Really? So
Yeah,
tell me more
yeah,
about
so
that.
that's how they came up with these things like ashwagandha and brahmi and some of these things that we use in psychiatry, turmeric. So, for example, the usage of bitter herbs in the treatment of diabetes. So what they did is, I think, right? So I wasn't there. You just have these texts where they'll say, okay, if you've got someone who's a diabetic, they need to eat bitter melon. So I think what they discovered is that when you feed someone a food that has an impact on their insulin metabolism, has an impact on their blood sugar, once this person eats bitter melon twice a day or drinks the juice of a bitter melon on a daily basis, the amount of sugar in the urine that the ants get attracted to goes down. They'll even taste urine to detect the sugar content using their tongue. And then I think they see that this leads to better outcomes over time. So I would not call that a correlation. I think at some point in the system of medicine, what you always have is an intervention, and then you measure that outcome in some way.
I guess to me, unless you randomize it and control for biases, it's not that.
That's a huge problem. But in the opposite way. So here's the key thing. So when you randomize, so we view the RCT as the hallmark, right? There's a huge problem with the RCT. So let's say I show you an RCT that says that cholesterol, let's say like cholesterol lowering medication. What is the outcome for an individual patient when you prospectively give them a cholesterol med?
You're talking about number needed to treat.
No, I'm not talking. Oh, you're sure, but. So if I come to you
That
today,
like 99% of the time for the individual, it's not going to have an impact. But for the general population, you will see.
So this is really important to understand. So our system of medicine does not make predictions about individuals. It makes predictions about populations. So Ayurvedic system of medicine is completely different because they don't care about populations, they care about individuals. So their whole system, so if you think about randomized controlled trials, what we're literally doing in that trial is removing the individuality from our system of medicine, which then creates a problem of external validity. So the basic problem of our studies is that we can do a study on 10,000 people, but you know this as a clinician. This is why we need clinicians, because your human brain needs to take all of this data and then translate it to apply it to an individual. So in the Ayurvedic system of medicine, they think that randomized controlled trials are the antithesis of practicing medicine.
Can I explain why I heavily disagree?
Yeah.
Well, I agree with, first of all, the notion of why we need clinicians, of taking generalized concepts and individualizing it to the person in front of us, 1,000%. And I think that's what my residents get wrong the majority of the time. I just did a video on this because the idea of number needed to treat, just why I brought that up, is because it's a topic where, for example, lowering blood pressure, we see population-based, controlling it to a certain number will prevent 30% of heart attacks and strokes. But for the person sitting in front of you, 98, 99% of the time, it's not going to do anything. So the question of why I still, the reason why I think randomized controlled methods are still the best for the individual is because we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
What does that mean?
We're throwing away randomized controlled studies because they're imperfect to the individual. I think we need to look at it deeper and say, right now, this is the best knowledge we have for the general public, which will ultimately be the best for you because this is the best information we have. In the future, as algorithms, as information gets better, I think we can better individualize randomized controlled studies so that we can run simultaneously thousands, millions of experiments to know, instead of 80 patients I need to give this blood pressure medicine to prevent the heart attack, only 10. So now I'm targeting the therapy more towards the individual and less towards the general public.
But so then ideally what you would want is not even a randomized controlled trial, you would want trials on an individual, right? Because that's when you produce perfect correlation between your scientific
Absolutely
methodology.
not.
Explain that to me.
Too much bias when you're treating a single person.
But isn't that what you're looking for? Is you want an amount of bias that is specific to the person. So let me give you an example.
I think bias works both ways.
So let me ask you a question. So let's say, so we now have some of these services in psychiatry where you can do genetic testing on a person.
Correct, to see which medication is going to have the best.
So do you think that those kinds of, these are not recommended by the American Psychiatric Association?
Yeah, I just had a patient bring this in last week.
Yeah. So I don't use them usually in clinical practice because the data does not show that using these services in randomized controlled trials is effective, which is hilarious.
Okay.
Right? So I'm with you there. But let's say, theoretically, if we could get to a point where that did work and we can recognize that, okay, this person has this kind of serotonin transporter gene and this kind of medication is effective, do you think is that the kind of goal of personalized medicine, is to create a system of understanding this person as an individual, not worrying about the population. It's what are your polymorphisms, so we can figure out the perfect medicine for you.
Yes, but the only way we can get there is with randomized controlled trials.
How so?
In order for us to know that this works on this person.
Oh, we have
I
to
need
say,
to-
a randomized controlled trial that this is effective for lots of people. Yeah. So the methodology is personalized, and then we are doing a randomized controlled trial on personalized methodologies
Correct.
to see that personalized. That I'm with you 100%.
Okay.
So when I look at the Ayurvedic system, I think they're closer to that personalized methodology.
Don't you feel like there's so much bias in that approach, though, when they try? Like, for example, I had Dr. Gundry on my podcast who makes a lot of claims that disagree with a lot of the big institutions, the American Academy of Family Physicians, United States Preventive Task Force, the American College of Cardiology, etc. And when someone presents information that disagrees with large bodies of evidence or large bodies of medical groups, you need to show me amazing evidence to show why you know, but the rest of the people don't. Like, you need to show me corruption on their side. You need to show me why you believe what you believe, what evidence you're looking at, etc. But when you're treating one person, to make your treatment successful doesn't require a lot of evidence.
How are you? I mean, how are you? How are you defining evidence?
In the statement that I made, evidence that I need to know that they're telling the truth is randomized controlled data
So how can you have randomized controlled data on an individual?
by scaling it.
But then it's not on an individual. Then it's on a population.
It's individual population medicine, because that's what an algorithm would do.
So you're talking about doing an RCT on individualized medicine versus population-based medicine.
Correct.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think we're disagreeing here. But what I'm kind of pointing out is, so let's talk about clinical practice, right? So when you know what works for this person, you have a pile of RCTs, but then you as a clinician individualize your treatment.
Of course.
Deviate for protocols to get the best clinical outcome.
Correct. And this is a practice. It's an art. Two doctors may recommend two different treatments and both be
Yeah.
acceptable.
So in this situation, how would you describe what you're doing? Would you call this individual practice of medicine? Would you call this...
The art of medicine.
Okay, so I think Ayurveda leans more into that. So
Got it.
Ayurveda basically says, okay, if we look at individuals, there is no such thing as an independent disease process that exists outside of an individual. That every disease process gets personalized when you stick it in a person. And so their approach, so I personally think that if we want to see proper outcomes from Ayurveda, we can never do an RCT. Because their whole system of medicine is that depression in me and depression in you is different. Which, by the way, it's really fascinating that we're moving in that direction. I'll get to that in a second. But what I think we really need to see for Eastern medicine, the right kind of study is actually a cohort study. So what we really need to do is take a cohort of people, give them Eastern medicine, cohort of people, give them allopathic medicine, and see who has better outcomes.
Well, that's not a cohort.
What do you mean?
In a situation where you'd randomize people and you'd say some of your, oh, you mean you want to do a comparison cohort as
Yeah,
opposed to give someone true Ayurvedic treatment versus a sham.
No, yeah, I'm talking about cohort studies.
Got it, okay.
So a non-inferiority trial
it,
between traditional allopathic treatment and Ayurvedic treatment. Because the whole point is that when their system of diagnosis presumes that there is not a treatment for depression. And then what we do is we take that thing, we remove all the individuality, which is a core part of their system of medicine. So their whole system of medicine is that, so there's even so for example, they believe that, I'm extrapolating here based on my expertise, but if you look at like depression, there are 3 subtypes of depression. So there is neurovegetative depression, right? So difficulty getting out of bed, things like that. Then we have anxious depression. We recognize these as 2 clinical entities. There's a really interesting 3rd subtype of depression called depression with anger attacks, where the primary manifestation is frustration and anger as opposed to feelings of sadness. Now, the really interesting thing is if you look in Ayurvedic medicine, they say that there are 3 dominant elements. There's like the earth element, there is the wind element, and then there's the fire element. So if you take this depressive pathophysiology and you stick it in someone who is a predominant earth type, you will end up with a neurovegetative depression. If you stick it in a person who's a wind type, you will end up with an anxious depression. And if you stick it in a fire type, these are like Pokemon, you will end up with a depression with anger attacks. So even in their literature, they have these 3 subtypes of depression built out, and they say that it correlates with something about your alleles and how they manifest, your phenotype.
I think we're talking about 2 different things. I think Ayurvedic medicine does fantastic observation.
Yeah.
Like what you're describing is they've observed
Yes,
different
100%.
And I think that's, you're going to get amazing validation even when you check individuals, when you do good observation. I think when you say we should do a cohort study to see if it is non-inferior, to me, that's the same thing as an RCT. Like, it's not the gold, like for us, an RCT is the gold standard, right?
Yeah.
But we have levels, a hierarchy of evidence. And cohorts are still up there. It's not just mechanistic, right? Like if you do a cohort study.
But a cohort study and RCT are 2 completely different study designs.
I agree, but in terms of weight of evidence,
Fine.
they're high levels.
No, but a weight of evidence is fine. But what I'm saying is that the RCT as a study design is antithetical to the system of medicine.
Sure, and I'm just using RCT because it happens to be the gold standard. Let's take cohort, let's take RCT, all the higher levels of evidence. They're not done for Ayurvedic medicine, at least the majority of
Yeah.
it. So, granted, we can't do RCT, but we can do cohort. Those things aren't done, so I feel like we are taking what they're doing and you're seeing it as a leaning towards story, towards observation, away from the evidence-based model. And I see it as full one-sided.
Well, I don't follow you.
You said earlier a statement that it leans towards the story-based, the individual-based, versus the group randomized control. I think it doesn't just lean in that direction. I think it's fully in that direction.
Absolutely. Right. So I think Ayurvedic medicine is not about populations. It's very different. So I think that that's fair.
Well, for example, you were talking about the art of medicine. I think that there needs to be a cautious balance between taking good quality evidence, whether that's RCT, cohort, etc., and then balancing that with the individual in front of you. But I think in Ayurvedic medicine, we're just having full-on art.
100%. So there are.
It's not 100% because they are taking into observations and all that.
So I mean, I'm sort of addressing the questions you're asking, but I am not a proponent of Ayurvedic medicine, even as it stands today. I know it sounds kind of weird because I'm talking about it. So before this whole healthy gamer thing, my actual area of interest was evidence-based complementary alternative medicine. So there are all kinds of problems that we haven't even touched on. I mean, here you are saying, what about this? What about this? I can dismantle Ayurvedic medicine because there are fundamental weaknesses. The first fundamental weakness of Ayurvedic medicine is that you have no way to gauge practitioner reliability.
Yep.
The good thing about allopathic medicine is that, at least in the United States, if you finish a medicine program, there are standards that people can expect. If you go, you're a family physician, I'm a psychiatrist, but 2 people who have a heart attack on an airplane, they're going to get some comparable care, right? Even I can handle that some. So the biggest problem with Ayurvedic medicine is when you have this individuality, how do you judge the quality of a practitioner? How do you know ahead of time whether this person is good or bad, whether there's biases in their patient population, if their patient population has high socioeconomic status, and this practitioner is very charismatic, so they're engaging the placebo effect? How do you even know that their treatments are working at all? This is a fundamental problem with Ayurvedic medicine, which is that the good thing that we get, this is why I think allopathic medicine has grown so well, is because it is reliable. Ayurvedic medicine, I do not know that it is even 10% as reliable as the practice of Western medicine.
So if you think that, why do you discuss Ayurvedic medicine principles often?
Because I think there is a huge amount of utility to it. And just because so if we can improve reliability on the Ayurvedic side, then I think we have something very potent, right? So, and the other reason is because I think that, like,
What is the thing that you think that's potent?
What do you mean?
You said that if we improve reliability, we'll have something on the Ayurvedic side that's potent. What would be potent?
So I think that they take this individualized approach. So in my clinical practice, the more that I think we get taught in Western medicine or in medical school, we tend to get taught the population-based medicine way more. And like you said, we call it the art. Why do we call it the art? Because we don't have explicit systems. So the whole point is in
There's
Ayurveda.
subjectivity to it. That's what art means, right?
Well, that's the reason we call it art is because we haven't made it scientific. Does that make sense? We haven't conceived of a way to make the art of medicine scientific, which is why we call it the art of medicine. But there is absolutely a logical, scientific method going on in your head.
I think it's an art not because it's not scientific. I think it's an art because it's not standardized. And maybe I'm just
Exactly.
mixing
So we
words.
have no.
yeah.
But that's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Is we have not developed a standardization. We have not scientifically broken apart the art side of medicine.
I don't think that can happen,
Yeah. Well, so there's a system of medicine that's done it.
which is what
Ayurveda.
So
That's what I'm saying is
But
they've taken the
do you
individuality.
believe that though?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of flaws, but I think that they've done it. Yeah.
You mentioned we need to bring some of Western medicine into Ayurvedic practice to improve
100%.
Ayurvedic practice. I view that as not an optimal use of time is probably the wrong word. I would view, based on how you describe Ayurvedic medicine, that there's a lot of problems. 90% of it has issues, et cetera, et cetera. Why not take what works of Ayurvedic medicine, the art aspect of it, and bring it to Western medicine, as opposed to bringing Western medicine and trying to fix something that is really very problematic, already so far gone?
It's a great question. So the first thing is that I think the question is sort of moot because I think both are happening simultaneously. So I think as we progress in our scientific understanding of medicine, we are moving closer to Ayurveda. So that's happening automatically because I think that as we're discovering more of truth, we're just moving in a particular direction of individualized medicine, which is the whole backdrop. So if you look at our Western system of medicine, the idea is that a disease process is independent of an individual and has a treatment. So the whole point of an RCT is let's remove all of the individuality, all of the specificity from an individual patient, because if we take an individual patient, we treat cholesterol in this individual patient, we have no idea how that's going to apply to the other 9,000 people we treat because this person is an individual. So let's remove individuality from the equation. Let's look at high blood pressure and let's try to isolate this disease process. Then we run into a problem in Western medicine because you can isolate this disease process in a laboratory, but the moment that you have a real person in front of you, things get complicated. Agreed?
100%.
So Ayurvedic medicine just looks at it from the opposite direction. They kind of say, okay, let's start with an individual and let's understand what works for this person. And then they also generalize. They sort of also have, diagnoses, right? Which obviously means that it's not, there's diagnoses that are shared amongst individuals, but they start from a more individual lens. We are starting at a population level and we are trying to narrow down to personalized medicine. They start at personalized medicine and they sort of extrapolate out to a more general way.
Isn't that flawed by design?
No. It's only flawed by design if you presume that the population base and the system, the existence of a disease process that is independent of people exists.
Wait, say that again?
So do you think that hypercholesterolemia can exist outside of a person?
Like exist in what way? Like on the definition of in a textbook it can.
Okay. So like, can you have hypercholesterolemia outside of a person?
Yes, in a petri dish.
Okay. Right? So when you translate that to a person, it becomes individualized, right? And then our core pathophysiology, completely agree that you can say, okay, whatever, there's something that can exist in a petri dish. When you translate it into a person, you are adding individuality to it. Maybe the word bias is good here. I don't know the way that you're using it. I'm not 100% sure. So all I'm saying is that the whole art of medicine is we have these general principles that are scientifically true, and we apply them to an individual. and then things get muddy, and we have to include the art of medicine, right? All Ayurveda does is they start with the presumption that a disease process and an individual, that every disease process is going to manifest in a unique way. And that is the foundation of how we are going to approach treatment. So if you say, is that biased in the sense that every treatment is individualized? Yes.
I'm going to make a comparison. You familiar with bro science?
No.
So when you go to the gym and you hang out in the gym environment, there's a lot of guys that walk around to claim that they have the right way of exercising, the right way. And it might be the right way for them. But if I in medicine try and take what worked for one person and try and scale it, I'm going to run into a disaster.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's better to look at population and then try and narrow it. That's why I think the principle of starting with one and going up and generalizing is way more problematic.
But so this is a fundamental misunderstanding. The whole point of Ayurveda is you don't generalize one to the broader population. You develop a system that works for each person ideally. That's what their approach is. There's no generalization. There's some generalization, some necessary generalization, but their whole point is that when someone comes to you and this guy is a bro science and he says this works for you, the Ayurvedic doctor says this worked for you, let me try to figure out, the next person comes along and they try to figure out what will work for you specifically. What will work for you specifically. They don't care about populations, they care about individuals.
And you don't think that's fraught with forever reliability issues?
What do you mean by reliability?
Again, like the practitioner reliability issues.
Oh, no, it's fraught with reliability.
Like that will never get solved.
I don't know that.
How can you have reliability when cults can lead people to do the most ridiculous things, feel certain ways because of the power of the mind to be manipulated? How can we ever measure what one individual is doing, whether or not that's valuable? Because I feel like it's so easily corruptible when we're just treating everyone as one.
So I think maybe I'm foolish. Maybe I'm optimistic. So here's where I'm coming from. Here's why I don't think it is an unsolvable problem. So if you look at the history of humanity, we've been faced with unsolvable problems that get solved. So I have faith that if we were to leverage even 10% of the brain power in scientific weight that we have in allopathic medicine towards Ayurveda, I think it'd be amazing what we would accomplish. That's my gut instinct. I don't know that that's true. Is it potentially an unsolvable problem? Absolutely. So what I think, though, is that what I've seen already is that it doesn't take a whole lot. So, I think that if we were to put together, cohort treatments, and we were to start to measure outcomes, so I do think we need to add some of this population-based stuff and evidence-based medicine. So let's compare Rasa Shastra, where someone gives arsenic and all this kind of stuff, to, for example, Ayurvedic herbs or the inclusion of yoga and Tai Chi. Let's actually take cohorts of these people and study and see what's better and what isn't. And then what we'll discover is there can be a methodology, because they still teach general methodologies, but the focus of the general methodology is not on a disease, it is on a person. So in Western medicine, what we do is we make a diagnosis and then we treat the diagnosis. We don't treat a person. We don't ask, and then clinically we end up doing this, which is that we start to treat a diagnosis. But then as we actually treat a human being, this treatment of a diagnosis doesn't work like that. The person doesn't take their blood pressure medication. So now you have to have this conversation with them, or they have this kind of side effect, and you have to change to this medication. So we end up individualizing, and that's what makes a good doctor. All I'm saying is if you think about it, the actual theoretical, if you read a pathology textbook, which has all of our understanding of medicine, you will not find any art of medicine in there. You'll find it in other textbooks, but not in a pathology textbook. Then in the practice of medicine, we are adding what you call the art. And all I'm saying is there is a whole system of medicine where we take the RCTs and the population-based stuff in the pathology textbook, we add the art. But this is not the bulk of our approach to medicine. This is the bulk of our approach. Does that make sense? Ayurvedic medicine says this is the bulk of our approach. That's the big difference.
Yeah, I'm just viewing starting points. Western medicine, we have the starting point of randomized control data, population-based data, that we can then tailor an art and improve our art. We definitely need to improve our art. I will never not support that. Ayurvedic medicine has such a fraught foundation. And we're like, let's bring randomized controlled and evidence and all that to this fraught concept already. Why?
I don't think that the fundamental concept is fraught. In fact,
But you said there's like 10% of it is only valuable.
Yeah, but I don't think the fundamentals are fraught. I think the fundamentals are actually, I think, the reason we practice, the more we practice the art of medicine, the closer we are to the Ayurvedic system. Because that's what their system is. It's an individual treatment.
But we end up there versus starting from there. I think that's a drastic distinction.
Yeah, it is a drastic distinction. But I don't think that one is necessarily worse than the other. I mean, I don't
think that they're worse. I just think if you're trying to start, like if I was creating a civilization and I was like, okay, let me find the most effective way to bring the best medical care. If I'm making a Sims game out of this, I would create randomized population data, and then I would bring in Ayurvedic principles, individualizing it later.
So let me, that's fine. So that's your prerogative, and I would encourage you to...
But I'm curious what you think about that.
So let me ask you this. What do you think is a better system of medicine? A system that is population-based, or a system that gets outcomes that are tailored to the individual? Let's say that I could perfectly diagnose you. I did all the genetic stuff. I could analyze all of your phenotypes. I could analyze even things like your digestion, your digestion, your absorption of nutrients, what kind of absorption difficulties you have, and I understood all of this information about you. Which one do you think would be better?
Of course, you created a perfect example, but that doesn't exist.
So the foundation of Ayurveda starts with that.
Yeah, but it's nowhere near it. It's not even close.
Oh, that's where you got to be careful, right? So I think that it's way closer than what we give it credit for.
You're saying they have a perfect understanding of each individual?
They do not have a perfect understanding. What I'm saying is that the direction that they are moving in is to focus on the individual. So we don't even focus on the individual. We focus on a population. So we have, let's say we'll use a video game analogy. So we've leveled up to level 100 on population-based medicine. And then the reason that we have good clinicians and bad clinicians is that the good clinicians are the ones who've leveled up to level 50 on individualized medicine. In Ayurveda, they've leveled up individualized medicine to level 100, but their population-based medicine is level 10.
I think when you use that example, when you level up to 100 on the individual level, your data is fraught with error and bias and subjectivity. Because you're not studying it en masse. And there's so many mistakes that you could make when you're just treating an N of 1.
Very true, right? So, but you're thinking from a population-based standpoint. But when you kind of think about it, and when you treat an individual, you can make so many mistakes. Because that's what you do in your practice, right? You don't treat populations, you treat individuals. So how do you figure out what is best for your individual patient who's sitting in front of you? It's fraught with errors, it's fraught with bias.
All of healthcare will always be fraught with error. Our job is to take the best worst approach. And to me, the best worst approach is seeing what works that's generalizable, continually fine-tuning it, as opposed, if I was building a pencil or I was building a house, it's much better to have the foundation of randomized controlled generalized data and then building upwards to get the subjectivity of how you want the house to look, whether it's pretty. But without a good foundation, that house is going to crumble. And I feel like Ayurvedic principles are built on a weak foundation.
So I think that's it's a very reasonable view, right? So, and I think that there's like good data to support that view, because there's a reason why allopathic medicine has spread all over the world and Ayurvedic medicine is not.
Well, that's a good question here to be had. Why do you think in Eastern culture we never got, well, not we, but why hasn't it moved to a labeling system, a randomized control system? Why has there been so much disconnect between randomized controlled stuff happening in Western medicine, but that is firmly pushed against in Eastern medicine?
Why do Eastern people not like randomized controlled trials?
Yeah, like why didn't throughout time, like the way Eastern medicine is talked about now is more similar to how Eastern medicine was talked about 500 years ago.
Okay, yeah.
Than Western medicine talked about now than how Western medicine was talked about. Why is that? Why is it seemingly stuck in the past?
So there,
for lack of a better word.
What do you think what's the differential diagnosis for why something doesn't change over 500 years?
My
Oh boy.
skewed skeptical belief is that it's based on
What's
culture.
What's the differential?
religion.
What? Okay, so culture is part of it. Religion is. What else is on the differential?
Lack of refinement.
Okay, that is also
It's on the
differential.
differential. I'm not saying it's
yeah,
the cause.
yeah.
That it works.
Absolutely. Right. So that's what's really
Well,
tricky.
hold on. We have that it fully doesn't work, lack of refinement, and that it can work. Those are
Absolutely.
possibilities.
Yes. So
we can't give them equal weight here and say, well, look.
no, but so it's good, right? So
Yeah.
so now you ask a question, right? That's on the differential.
yeah, I mean,
Maybe
when
the
a
reason-
patient comes in with 2 days of cough, cancer is on the differential, but we don't talk about it because that's not valuable.
Sure, but I think in the case of, let's say, like, let's look at these Eastern traditions. So these are the traditions that gave us meditation, right? So this is where I think part of the reason, and like, I don't,
When you say a statement like that, you know what I hear?
what?
When a patient comes in with 2 days of cough, if I say that it's cancer, I'm going to be wrong so often. But I will be right sometimes. Ayurvedic medicine, you're showing me came up with meditation. That's that one time they called cough cancer.
Fair enough.
And it turned out to be
So,
cancer.
so I don't even disagree with you there. So this is exactly where, like, I think that's why, I mean, I gave this example where Dr. Denninger was like, the biggest problem with Ayurvedic medicine, I'll be the first one to say this, right? So I feel like I'm adopting a pro-Ayurvedic stance because of the way you're asking questions, but I don't use Ayurvedic medicine with the majority of my patients. I use evidence-based techniques with the majority of my patients because they are reliable.
right.
And at the same time, I'm with you that I don't know. So if you look at this text called Charak Samhita, there's like tons of treatments in there. I have no idea how many of those are effective as meditation. We even have evidence that some of them are harmful, like Rasa Shastra, right? So I steer clear of that but then the problem in the Ayurvedic system is if you go talk to an Ayurvedic doctor, many of them will not say, oh yeah, this doesn't work. That's a huge problem. Right? They'll say like, oh, we don't understand it well, or they'll like kind of poo-poo. And maybe they're right, maybe we're right, I don't know. So I'll be the first. So my area of expertise is evidence-based complementary and alternative medicine. So the whole point is that there's something very valuable here. This is my belief. Something very valuable here, and we need to separate the chaff from the wheat. We need to figure out what is actually really useful here. One of the things that I think we can learn a lot from is that I do believe that their generalized approach, because this is what we end up doing in clinical medicine anyway, is we focus on an individual. But there is always a translation problem from the RCT down to the individual. But there are some major advantages that we get for that. The biggest advantage that we get for that is that on the human race, we have outperformed Ayurvedic medicine. On the level of population, we have outperformed because in these Eastern systems, they do not have ways of testing validity. They do not have ways of separating the good from the bad. They do not have ways of measuring a good person and a bad person. So this used to be there, theoretically, if we want to be optimistic, this used to be there historically because of the way that it was taught. So there's this concept of parampara or lineage, where like if you had a good teacher, like, and now things have changed, we can get to this with meditation. So you had this lineage where like you basically have like a system of mentorship where if you trained under this person, you're like going to be good because this person would not let you out unless they were good. There's still problems with bias there, but I think the biggest challenge that we've had in Ayurvedic medicine is we've lost some of their fundamental safeguards like lineage, and then we've replaced it with like standardized education because that's what we do in the West. And so now we have a system that from its bones is open to things like validity, open to things like not being critical of itself, and then we are removing the one safeguard, which is this concept of parampara or lineage. Now we're giving people degrees and certificates from universities. I have no idea how to tell whether someone is good or bad. And what I have seen as a medical doctor, like part of the reason that, you know, I studied Ayurveda, fell in love with it, and then I went to medical school. Because what I saw is that I have no idea what's the quality of education I'm going to get. I have no idea what's the what the reliability of some of these methodologies are. I've seen things that are medical impossibilities from Ayurveda. With my own eyes, I've talked to patients that are medical impossibilities. Like paralysis, being able to, polio paralysis, right, which is a permanent condition. That's not something that generally speaking gets better. These people are able to walk. And so when I look at that, it gives me pause, and it says to me, there is potential here. So what did I do? Did I say, oh my God, there's potential here, let me go to Ayurvedic doctor and I'm going to indoctrinate myself? No, I went to medical school, focused on evidence-based complementary alternative medicine, realized that in the grand scheme of being a doctor in the world today, each of us can make a contribution. What do I want my contribution to be? I saw something that I thought was very I saw something that I saw potential in. And I said to myself, even if 90% of it is shit, I can't judge whether 90% is good, 10% is good, 50%, I have no idea. But there's something here that we in the West can benefit from. And that's been what my focus is on.
What do you like about Ayurvedic medicine? What is that part?
So I like that they focus on the individual.
Got it. What else?
So I like that they look at, so just as a psychiatrist, so like one thing that I really appreciated was this concept of like a cognitive fingerprint. So we have this in some ways in terms of like 5-factor model and stuff like that. We have these personality assessments, but these personality assessments are usually done at the population level. And so the translation down to the individual is not as clinically useful as some of these Eastern conceptions of cognitive fingerprint. So when I work with a patient, doing a 5-factor assessment has very little bearing on my clinical practice. But doing more of an Ayurvedic personality assessment has a lot more utility in my limited biased experience compared to some of these generalizable personality assessments. There are some cases where those can be good, but I think that some of this stuff is quite revolutionary because it helps me understand, so even like, for example, depression, understanding like, okay, what is this person's Ayurvedic dosha? It helps inform me about how to approach this kind of thing. Also in my clinical practice, what I've seen is if people adopt Ayurvedic diet, they're more likely to have sustained remission at lower medication doses or be able to come off of medication. That is nothing magical, by the way. I think they just sort of figured out gut microbiome observationally, and that now we're discovering the mechanism. But it's really interesting that their first-line treatment for mental illnesses seems to be diet, and my guess is the mechanism is gut microbiome modification to support neurotransmitter precursor production. That's my take. And what I've seen very clinically is when I apply some of these principles to my clinical practice, that patients tend to do better.
So I'm going to keep track of it. Individualism, stratifying personality types,
Yeah.
cognitive fingerprinting, as you called it, and then diet, lifestyle, I guess, is one of them. It seems to me, based on this conversation, Ayurvedic medicine is fraught with a lot of bias issues, etc., that you pointed out, reliability, all that. Since so much of it is inaccurate, and there's a few things that you think is very valuable that are missing from modern medicine, why not take the concepts of those things, like improving the cognitive fingerprinting of modern tools, focusing more on the individual approach, and stop calling it and talking about Ayurvedic medicine? Because it's sexy to talk about Ayurvedic medicine because people are passionate about it. But 90% plus is crap. And yet I feel like we're keeping it afloat.
Well, I don't know that it's crap, and you don't know that it's crap.
Well, we know that it's crap because of how it got to where it is, because of the lack of reliability, the randomization.
But we don't know it's crap. We just don't know that it's not crap. There's a
Right.
big difference.
And when someone makes a claim that this water will prevent you from dying, or this is the anti-aging water, do you know that this is not going to prevent you from living forever? Like, do you know that I'm lying about this?
No, I don't.
Right? You need to do a trial. But I'm very comfortable as a doctor
I'm
now
with you.
saying, no, that's not happening.
Yeah,
Because mechanistically it's not there, the evidence isn't there, and I've gotten to the point where even though I don't have the evidence.
So,
to
Mike,
say-
what frustrates you so much about Ayurvedic medicine?
I'll tell you what. It leads to a fundamental misunderstanding of healthcare for a large percentage of patients. It opens room for health gurus and hucksters to take advantage of people. And it actually diverts our attention from ways that we can improve medicine.
Okay. So now I'm understanding this conversation a lot better. So I noticed that this was becoming very antagonistic, which was really weird because I actually agree with the majority of what you're saying.
I see that.
Yeah, right. So I'm the first to kind of say, like, I'm the one who said, hey, like 90% of it I think could be crap. And so I was kind of struck a little bit, and then that's when I realized, like, I'm not talking to someone who has an open mind. I'm talking to someone who has a mind made up.
I'm talking about it from a truth-seeking perspective. So my mind's not made up. If you presented some data or information here that showed Ayurvedic medicine is way more accurate than you think it is, I would have changed my mind today.
Yeah, so it's interesting, but I think
I definitely have a bias.
Yeah,
from
so
what I've learned so far.
How is this conversation for you emotionally?
Exciting.
In what way? So do you feel anything besides excitement?
Full excitement that we're finding a way to truth seek together. Because unlike many people who talk about Ayurvedic medicine in this space, I think you do it incredibly honestly.
So, because I agree with you, but I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind. So when you make a statement like, 90% of it is crap, that indicates bias to me because we don't know that. You make a very good argument that we have to be skeptical based on our understanding of things. That if I show up today and I say like, oh, like, here's a pyramid. If you meditate under the pyramid, like it could work. And then you can always make the counter argument that until you study it, we don't know, they could be right.
Right.
And what I'm also detecting from you is like, I think I'm detecting this emotion of frustration because of hucksters and these kinds of people. So I think your understanding of Ayurveda comes from these people. And so that's why I was kind of surprised because usually in conversations, I am representing your view a lot more.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll go to these academic conferences with a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners and I'll say like, hey, like we don't know. There are 8 disciplines of Ayurveda. We have some limited evidence of this particular thing, Brahmi, turmeric, ashwagandha, like a set of herbs. We don't have a whole lot of stuff on this. And so I think it's just been really interesting. Now I understand a lot more why this conversation is going the way that it is, which is that you're asking me all these questions, which I get the sense that you're sort of open to the answer, but I think you're asking questions that are not open-ended questions. You're asking questions where you already have a hypothesis, and you are asking me to reflect upon that hypothesis or even counter that hypothesis or support it.
That's fair.
Which is, I was just...
And I think our hypothesis is similar.
Yeah, so I think though...
And our standpoint is similar.
I think that you would benefit from studying Ayurvedic medicine.
Agreed, which is what I'm hoping in this conversation I can learn more about.
So I think just this individualized approach, it's so axiomatically different. I think there's value to it.
Without a doubt.
And in terms of why not translate it over, I think there are a couple of... I think that's good, and I think that's part of the direction we should move in. And I think there's a slight problem with that, which this rubs me emotionally the wrong way, which is that there's a certain amount of cultural appropriation to it. So if we look at meditation, let's go back to meditation for a second. So we look at meditation, and we kind of say, okay, mindfulness is scientific, this is good, this is good, this is all woo-woo. But if we kind of think about it, what's happening is we're taking all of it was woo-woo, and then we're taking this and we're saying the rest of it is woo-woo. We're taking this and we're saying the rest of it is woo-woo. We're taking this and we're saying the rest of it is woo-woo. Now, this is very reasonable from the sense of how does science progress? We have the unknown, we take a chunk, and now this is known, and here's the unknown, we take a chunk. It's very reasonable. On the flip side, I think what ends up happening is if this was our original chunk, and we say that this much is, and I don't think we're nowhere near that. We're like right here in meditation. If we say that this much is valid, there is a certain bias that can set in of we're not sort of recognizing that 60% of this stuff was correct. We're sort of saying 100% of it is always wrong because we move the stuff that is scientifically valid over to science and we remove it from the realm of, let's say, spiritual tradition.
But have we done that?
That's what's happening. Absolutely.
In what way? Can you give me a specific example of that?
Yeah, so like cardiac coherence breathing. So for example,
What's that?
so we have this in the East, we have this system of prana. Okay, so this is chi or vital life force. There's no scientific evidence of this. The best example that I've ever heard is, once again, researchers at Harvard discovered that there are channels of electrical conductance in the interstitial space that are variable. So they were like, oh, if you heard of meridians or nadis like this in
I've
Tai
heard
Chi.
of them,
Yeah.
but I don't really
So
understand.
there's this idea that we have this vital life energy that flows through us. It flows through these channels. We biologically looked for it, and it doesn't we can't find anything.
Well, we can't measure it yet, right? We might in the future.
We
might
might.
not just have the tools to currently measure it.
Yeah, so,
I'm open to that.
Yeah, so and that's where some people are looking for it. And one person, for example, discovered that there are interstitial channels, basically, that don't have a tissue difference. There's a change at the level of the electrical conductance, but there isn't like a physical, like,
Anatomical thing.
yeah. So it could be there, sure. But I think what's really interesting is we have no scientific evidence for that. So then we have these systems of something called pranayam, which is you do these techniques which are designed to basically stimulate this vital life energy, which we have no scientific evidence for. Okay? So when we move something, and so then we'll take this Sanskrit practice of pranayam, and then we'll turn it into a scientific term like non-sleep deep rest or cardiac coherence breathing or things like that. These are all yogic practices.
What do they mean? Just so I can follow along. What is a cardiac breathing?
A cardiac coherence breathing is basically alternate nostril breathing. It's this old yogic practice called pranayam, or nadi shuddhi. And what we kind of do is we try to figure out, okay, what is the distillation of the scientific principles, and we're going to kind of give it a new name. And then I think something is lost there because the moment that we denude it of spirituality, there's a good reason to do that. Because I think you sort of need to do that because from a scientific RCT perspective, you need some way to standardize the protocol, and you need to make sure that everyone is like working with the same thing. So there's good reasons to do that. But there's also losses in that, which is that we're removing it from the spiritual tradition, which I think is actually where a lot of the therapeutic value is. So one example of this is there's something that's growing a lot, which is non-sleep deep rest. Have you heard of this? Okay.
Like micro naps?
No.
Okay.
So it's a practice that's called yoga nidra. So yoga nidra is yogic sleep. So it's this like ancient yogic technique, and we basically medicalized it by protocolizing it, sort of reducing it in some ways. And what they actually do is intentionally remove a lot of the spiritual woo-woo stuff. So then we do studies on it, and non-sleep deep rest has good outcomes. So we know, for example, that yoga and tai chi outperform standard exercise when it comes to things like osteoarthritis or mental illness. There are RCTs. You're familiar with that?
Familiar with that research?
Yeah.
That they outperform it? I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's some studies that show that. So actually, let's do a quick aside. So that's what makes me really wonder about the value of some of these traditions. Because if we look at studies that show that yoga is superior to physical exercise, so there's one paper from, I think, 2016 in the New England Journal of Medicine on Tai Chi and osteoarthritis that basically showed that it was very effective. So then, interestingly, from a scientific perspective, if we say, okay, like if all that exists is physical, then exercise should be the same as Tai Chi. The other way to think about it is that even if it's still physical, it's not necessarily that energy exists, but when you use this heuristic or this concept of energy and you develop a practice based on that concept, the physical biological postures that you do are somehow superior to this other set of postures that is exercise. Does that make sense, or did I lose you there?
No, and I have to really dumb things down in my mind for me to understand them, and I'm going to tell you how it's landing for me, and you tell me if it's accurate. When you put meaning into what you're doing, spirituality is a form of meaning, you get better outcomes.
I don't think that's it at all.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that there are mechanisms at play. So let me try to explain it better. So we have a study. You can look at the paper. I'll send you the reference. So Tai Chi and osteoarthritis outperforms physical exercise. Okay. So now let's understand Tai Chi is based on this theory of vital life energy, which we have no scientific evidence for. So then the question becomes, how do we explain this result that this practice, which is based on a non-real thing, outperforms a seemingly comparable practice? They're both just moving around. So there are two explanations for this. One, or probably more, one is that this thing does exist and is not measurable. The second is that even if it doesn't exist, the concept of this existing and something about the way that they developed those practices based on this concept, it's still just completely biological. But because we were considering chi, we developed this different set of movements. And if you look at someone who just does stretching or calisthenics or whatever, these other physical practices, that there is a difference in the physical practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I could send a patient for physical therapy, and the physical therapist can target, like, let's say someone has a low back strain, and I send them to physical therapy. They can focus on massage and movements of their thoracic spine and loosening that up. They can focus on glute strengthening and hamstring tightness and posterior chain strengthening. They're all movements, but they're going to yield radically different results.
Yeah, perfect, right? So that's what I'm saying, is that there's something about the theoretical,
movement, yeah.
there's something about the theoretical backdrop that they developed, whether it's real or not real, that leads to a particular protocol which outperforms our understanding of exercise.
Right.
So I think that even if we assume that latter case, I think we could be losing something, because if we even remove that theory that gave us the practices in the first place, we could be depriving ourselves of a certain methodology that leads to interventions that are quite good. I don't know if I lost you there. This is the most technical conversation about this I've had in a long time.
This is great.
Fantastic.
I love this. It's a very heady conversation, because we're talking about tertiary level concepts right now, of imaginary concepts. So where my mind is going is that you feel that the way Tai Chi was created, we shouldn't just focus on Tai Chi, we should focus on how Tai Chi was created, because there's value there.
Potentially, right?
Right.
Focus on in terms of investigation.
Right.
So what? Just to give you another example. So like I was when I was at like McLean Hospital, I was developing protocols for specific pranayama or breathing practices to target specific illnesses. So if you look at the RCTs, what we see is RCTs on mindfulness. But if you look at what is the actual thing that people are doing, it's wildly different.
Of course.
And what we see is that in DBT, we'll call something mindfulness, but these are very different from mindfulness for like stress reduction. So for something like MBSR, these are open awareness techniques, and there's some great research that Silbersweig out of Brigham and Women's has done about sort of the different types of meditation. So not all mindfulness is the same. And what I've sort of found is that if you do traditional mindfulness for people with a history of trauma, it has the opposite effect. So traditional mindfulness is just open, non-judgmental awareness of the flow of your thoughts. If you have a patient who has BPD or trauma, and you just tell them to openly open awareness of non-judgmental appraisal of your thoughts, we have all these psychological defense mechanisms that are keeping these traumas at bay. As soon as that opens up, they're going to get overwhelmed by their trauma. So if you look at the mindfulness in something like dialectical behavioral therapy, these are not open awareness techniques. These are grounding techniques. These are things like ice diving, where you're not non-judgmentally observing anything. You are actually inducing a particular sensory focus that is so demanding that you can no longer think. So when we look at these two things now in Western science, we don't really have a good understanding of that differentiation. So I absolutely think we need that. What I'm saying is that when you take it from a theoretical process from where it was developed, and you sort of consider that, it gives us a lot of basically lead time into scientific investigation. Because when I'm developing a particular set of breathing practices for anxiety versus depression versus trauma, I have this Eastern conception, which has this whole thing where they basically say this will work for anxiety, but they don't call it that. So they'll say, for example, this practice will slow down the thoughts in the mind. This practice will energize the prana. This practice will cool the prana. They use all these weird heuristics. And what I have observed in my clinical practice, this is a small sample size. My path took me in a different direction. But what I was really working on is trying to see, okay, if we use this theory and we develop a set of protocols, this is basically what Marshall Linehan did with DBT in some form, we can actually accelerate the rate of our scientific research because we have these answers already here.
So where is the cultural misappropriation or appropriation come in that you have a problem?
Yeah, so the moment that we remove that spirituality from it, I think we lose that value generating aspect. Right? So the moment that
why do we have to lose that? Like, for example, you took the principles of those breathing practices of slow the mind or energize the mind, and you adapted them to modern medical defined conditions.
Yeah.
Why does it Why in this scenario do you feel like you're losing the spiritual connection?
Because when we publish papers about it, the more that I include that information, which is really where I got my answers from, right? The more that I include that, the less likely it is to be published. So
Why?
Because people don't publish that.
Why?
I don't know. Because it's not scientific.
But the science mechanisms, theories are not scientific in nature.
Yeah.
So I could have a thought today that I would put up for scientific testing. How in the world would a company not want to publish something if something works simply because the beginnings of it weren't scientifically valuable?
If you look at the studies, the evidence-based studies, right? These are studies that are published. So if you look at like New England Journal of Medicine thing on Tai Chi, you'll find you'll see a small section in the background that Tai Chi is an ancient practice based on this theory. You won't have a single line about what is actually happening to the chi in your body when you do this kind of thing.
Correct.
So there is a strong publication bias against this kind of stuff. I don't know why. I mean, you have to ask the
But
journal editors.
what is the value of including the history of it?
It's not history. What I'm talking about is they have a mechanism, right? So they have a theoretical mechanism with which they develop a practice. And we know from evident RCTs that the practice is quite effective.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that the moment that we publish that paper and we remove the theoretical basis, it's kind of okay because we still see that Tai Chi works. There's other problems that we get into. But then what we're also doing is it's not about credit, but the way that this practice was developed was based on this theoretical model. And if we remove the theoretical model, we don't have that theoretical model to generate other practices or to work with that theoretical model. So let me put it this way. Let me give you an analogy. So let's say that there's a group of aliens, and I introduce to them microbiology. And I say, here are the principles of microbiology. And then I give them, let's say, I don't know, penicillin, okay? So if I do an RCT on penicillin, I say penicillin is great, but by the way, microbiology is all BS. We just can study penicillin, we know penicillin works. And then this alien civilization starts just delivering penicillin but they don't understand anything about microbiology. What are the problems in that? We have an RCT that penicillin works, and then we give them, and they start administering penicillin. What's the problem?
Resistance?
Absolutely. Right? So this is one example where understanding the underlying theory becomes very important for the implementation of the practice. And what we are losing in Western medicine is we are removing that underlying theory, which opens us up to different perspective problems. And antibiotic resistance is just a good example, right? So that was like, I knew what you were going to say. I knew what the answer was. That's why I picked that example. So it's not sufficient to just do an RCT because there are other principles at play, and there are RCTs involved in those principles. We have RCTs on antibiotic resistance, but that's where understanding the theoretical basis of our treatments becomes critical to avoid pitfalls like this. And what
Can you give me an example of something like that within the field of Ayurvedic medicine or spirituality?
Yeah. So, man, this is where things get fun. So let me ask you this. Where do the thoughts in your mind come from?
I don't know if I have the answer to that.
What do you think?
Neurons, blood flow, firing, creating action potentials.
Okay. So neurons, blood flow, firing, creating action potentials are all the same, right? Like so you having a thought right now?
Yeah.
Where's that thought coming from?
My brain.
Okay. But is there any other thing in the causal chain that is creating that thought?
Is there anything else in the causal chain creating the thought? Sensation, receptors, etc.
Right. So the simple idea. So one of the places that thoughts in our brain come from, this is based on the yogic concept. So sure, it's translated through the brain, but we know that our sense organs are a source of thoughts. This is why advertising is a thing. If I show something to your eyes over and over and over again, it will trigger certain thoughts. It will trigger certain desires. Agreed? Okay. So where else do thoughts come from? So we can also have thoughts. So I'll speed run this. You're welcome to question it.
Memories, etc.
Yeah, so memories of sensory experiences. So how do I want a hamburger? So later tonight when you're relaxing at home, you're going to be thinking to yourself, man, I wish Dr. K would touch my toes again, right? And so where does that thought come from? That thought comes from a memory. So we can have thoughts sometimes come from sensory impressions and sometimes come from memories. We can also think about something like studying, right? So I'm asking you questions, you're asking me questions. Where does this information come from? It comes from our memories. So let's take someone like anxiety, someone who has anxiety, or someone who has something like trauma. So these people literally have thoughts in their brain. They have, let's say, low self-esteem. But what does low self-esteem mean? There is a mechanism of low self-esteem. It is, maybe there's activation of the default mode network. We understand the neurology of this. But from an experiential standpoint, there is something in their, let's call it subconscious mind, I can go into more detail if you want, that generates low self-esteem thoughts. So if someone gets me a nice gift, my mind will, this is a sensory input, right? So I hand you a gift, you hand me a gift. Your mind can say, oh, this is wonderful, this is great, thank you so much. Someone else's mind can say, oh, I don't deserve this, right? So the thought is coming from somewhere. So along comes Yoga Nidra. And what the yogis basically discovered is that the more empty or non-active your mind is, the less activity that is in your mind, the deeper something will sink into your mind. Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know what deeper into your mind means.
I'll give you a simple example. So let's say you're studying for a test, right? So your licensing exam. And you're in let's say you're looking at a textbook. The more activity is in your mind, if you're thinking about this, let's say the library's on fire, there's going to be so much mental activity that what you're trying to absorb does not sink in. It doesn't enter your mind, it kind of bounces off. So you have to read the page again.
Retention is not.
Yes, attention is not there. So the retention and attention.
Yeah.
So one-pointedness of attention correlates with retention. Okay, agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. So now enter non-sleep deep rest. So this is a practice originally called Yoga Nidra. Now people are doing studies on it, lowers your cortisol level, all this good stuff, right? All these physiologic parameters. But the whole point of Yoga Nidra is not to do any of these things. The whole point of Yoga Nidra is to enter into such a state of rest. That's not the point of the practice, that's the prep. And then to implant thoughts deep into your mind so that they generate into your conscious mind. So what I mean by that is you take something called a sankalpa or a resolve. So whatever sankalp you use during Yoga Nidra gets implanted into your mind and then starts populating your mind during your regular time. So when I use this with patients, for example, who have a history of trauma and have self-esteem problems, so like, we came up with one sankalp, which is like, I deserve to be whole. So it's not that I am a good person, I'm going to manifest things in the universe, and there's interesting science on manifestation and stuff, which we can get to, but and it's just this idea that if you literally look at a patient who is struggling, their mind will have 100 thoughts over the course of the hour, and there is a particular practice that allows us to add 10 thoughts of whatever we want. So this is sort of the spiritual value of a sankalp, and even there's even more even psychological benefits to it. There's spiritual benefits and transcendental benefits and all this kind of stuff, which is really what a sankalp is about. But the point is that when we just do non-sleep deep rest, you can look at all the studies on that, and no one's going to say anything about a sankalp. But when you do the practice the way it was designed to be done, and you add something like a sankalp, from a Western standpoint, there may be some kind of auto-suggestion or something like that, some kind of cognitive reframing. We're not quite sure what the mechanism is, but there's something to put your state of mind into something that is like a hypnotic state of mind, and then whatever you implant generates thoughts. So when I do this practice in my clinical practice, which, by the way, I usually do proper informed consent with my patients, I say, here's what the science shows. I spent 7 years in India. This is what I'd like to try with you. Here's what I think will happen, but there's no data to support that, so I go through all that with all my patients. And what I find is that there is immense therapeutic value in adding the sankalp. That's an example.
And modern science doesn't yet do that.
No.
And why do you think they don't?
Because it's spiritual in nature? Well, two reasons. One is because it's spiritual and there's no basis for it, right? There's no mechanism to understand what a sankalp is. So it just gets removed from literally what happens is you'll get people who will study this stuff, and then they'll remove all the spiritual woo-woo for it because we don't have a mechanism for it. Because really what a Sankalp is about is not the psychological manifestation, it's even an external manifestation or a spiritual manifestation.
In Western medicine, now that we've proven this non-sleep deep rest has some benefits, that's step one. Wouldn't then be step two testing whether or not adding this Sankalp?
Absolutely. So that's what I said. There's two reasons for that. One is, and this is why I think it's a double-edged sword. So if you look at something like mindfulness, I think we've lost a whole lot, but it is a absolutely necessary step. Because without the discovery of mindfulness and the protocolization and the removal of the spirituality, you've got this guru who's doing this mantra over here, you've got this guru who's doing this, you've got transcendental meditation. So now we have a research problem, which is all these people are doing different things. What is responsible for the therapeutic change that we see in transcendental meditation or this kind of meditation or this kind of meditation?
Yeah.
So we have to distill it down to some kind of protocol, and then we grow from there. So that is literally what the work that I try to do. And at the same time, what I notice is that while that work is being done in my clinical practice, if I lean on just non-sleep deep rest in terms of instead of yoga nidra, what I find is a lack of, I'm leaving something behind clinically. But I think it's the way that we have to do it.
I think you and I see eye to eye on this topic really pretty much one-to-one, maybe
Yeah.
99.9% of the way.
I think we see eye to eye on Ayurvedic stuff almost.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Really, really close. My question is, when you're doing that practice and you're doing the informed consent, and you're doing it before the evidence hasn't caught up to it yet, how would you feel if when you, let's say a patient comes into a doctor's office and the doctor says, hey, look, this medicine has never been proven to work for your condition through scientific rigor, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Just trust me. Do you have an issue with that?
What do you mean by issue?
Do you think that's ethical? Because you can
So
go
the-
down
the-
the line and say there is off-label prescription. Yes, there is.
Yeah, no, so here's a fascinating study by a guy named Ted Kapchuk. So he's a placebo researcher out of Harvard and was a mentor to my PI. So he did a super interesting placebo study. He said, I'm going to give you a placebo. This is a placebo, but we know that placebos work. And he said, I think this will help you. And turns out that the placebo helps, even if people know it's a placebo.
Sure.
So I think that, off-label prescribing, as long as you do it with informed consent and the doctor has some kind of rationale behind why they're prescribing it, I think that's reasonable.
So what is your rationale for adding the Sunkip? Sorry, I'm saying it wrong.
So I have some experience, and I also believe that, like I'm kind of saying, some of the roots have value. So then what I'll do is I'll even explain to my patients, I'm pretty clear about, this is what the data shows. So this technique will absolutely be in line with what we understand is the evidence-based practice of mindfulness. Based on my spiritual training, there is an additional component which, if you're interested in, we can do. Secondly, here are the 2 or 3, I've seen this to be very effective. Here are the mechanisms that I would hypothesize from a Western standpoint. Here's what I think could be going on with neuroscience, with this. And then I'll put it to the patient and let them decide.
Right. Aren't you just giving them a placebo and calling it a placebo by doing that?
What is a placebo?
You're giving them something that is unproven so far by our Western methods and saying there's no evidence for it. So you're saying it's a placebo. You're admitting that to them, to the patient. But you're saying you think it would help.
What is a placebo? How would you
To
define
me, the description of placebo is something that we do not feel like would help the patient through a mechanism by which we understand.
Yeah. So here's how I would describe placebo. Placebo is things that work that we just don't have mechanisms for.
That's what, yeah.
Yeah. Right? So, and that's where I would say, here is the hypothesized mechanism, but I think we have to do it. I wouldn't call it a placebo, but you could absolutely make the argument that you are engendering the placebo effect. But I think that is absolutely necessary. You have to do that. right? Because if we're talking about ethics, you can recommend things that are off-label that we may not understand the mechanism for. That's actually okay. So whether you call it placebo or off-label prescribing, I think it's somewhere in there. Are people engendering the placebo effect? Almost certainly. And this is where there's even I'm in a worse position for this, to kind of support your point, which is that there's a huge selection bias of people who come to my practice. So people who come to my practice are looking for, they already have a preset idea of, okay, this guy's going to teach me something special. I give something special, it fulfills their expectations, and they see a clinical benefit. The clinical benefit is, the reason people come to me is because people who've been to 10 psychiatrists before, I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything, a lot of people will come to me and they've tried other things. I mean, I even started a consult service at MGH where the majority of my patients were from other psychiatrists because they wanted to learn this stuff. So there's even a selection bias, which I absolutely have to consider. My take, though, is that there is a very real mechanism to this. So I don't think, and that could still be placebo.
My question is, how do you you're so honest with this, and I love this. So I have to give you huge props to this, because I can't tell you how many doctors will claim, I've helped 10,000 people. And I'm like, but selection, like the people who are coming to you.
No, I have a bigger placebo problem than the average person.
So that's amazing that you're like taking that into consideration.
Terrifies me, Mike.
So now the question is, how do you decide or decipher between what you're doing being truly beneficial versus, is this a placebo effect, or does it not matter?
So I can't decipher.
And does it matter? Is it important to decipher?
In a theoretical perspective, absolutely.
So,
right? So
how do we get there?
So that's where I'm trying to do, like, so before this whole healthy gamer thing, I was trying to develop clinical protocols for specific meditation regimens for particular diagnoses. Right? So we'll have studies on mindfulness for anxiety and mindfulness for depression. But my whole belief is if you have an energizing pranayam, these people who figured this mindfulness crap out also had other things that they figured out. And they said certain kinds of breathing practices are energizing. And we even have some physiologic evidence of the support of this. And this is why I do it, basically, because we know that some breathing practices will activate your sympathetic nervous system. Some practices will activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And oh shit, they seem to have figured that out. So then when I look at that, I think that, okay, so here's kind of where I am, which is like, okay, this much is correct. Oh, it's interesting. There's like some stuff that's correct here. One really fascinating thing, I was talking to a cardiologist who teaches pranayam. And I was asking him, like, you know, what do you think about this stuff? Because you're a cardiologist. This was back before I was in med school. And so he said, oh, like, I think this stuff works really well. And he says that the particular practices that maybe even you can figure this out, you know, practices that I do involve very low respiratory rates. So if I have a very low respiratory rate, what does that do to my
Parasympathetic nervous system?
Can activate parasympathetic nervous system. So we're dropping our O2 levels. We're increasing our CO2 levels. You're practicing this for a long period of time. What his observation is that when he has patients who do pranayam and they induce transient low O2 levels and high CO2 levels for extended periods of time over the course of years, that when he ends up doing bypass surgery on them, they have a lot more collateral circulation around the heart. So he believes that the mechanism through which pranayam protects against heart attacks, transient O2, oh crap, our blood vessels, our vasculature around the heart is like, we're running out of O2, we need collaterals.
Of course, yeah.
Right? So physiologically inducing collateral circulation.
Neovascularization.
Yes.
Okay.
Right? By transiently decreasing O2.
Acute stress a lot of times yields great outcomes for the human body. That's
So that's where it's acute stress in a controlled and safe way that doesn't tip you past the point of what your heart can't handle.
Correct.
Right? So I think that I've seen enough mechanistic support to where I think that this is not just what we call placebo, but then the flip side is placebo just mechanisms that we don't understand yet?
Well, yeah.
Right?
It can be.
Yeah. So I think that for me, it's fine. So the other thing for me is that I think informed consent is very important. I think letting people know what is scientifically supported and what is very important. The other thing that I personally feel, so here's, I think, one thing that we haven't really gotten to, because you're like, why don't we do research? Why don't we do research on it? Here's why I don't do it, or why I haven't done it. So I have a sense of desperation. So like, especially when it comes to Healthy Gamer and like all this stuff on video game addiction, it's like, so I got 2 amazing job offers from 2 just amazing people. And, you know, one of them was like, here's the academic track at Harvard Medical School. And like, you're going to apply for this grant and this grant and this grant. And 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you're going to be the guy. And this is amazing. It's beautiful. I had such amazing mentors who were so kind to give me this opportunity. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, what happens to all the people who are struggling over the course of those 10 years? Right? So what really bothers me about it as a clinician is that, like, it's fine that I think we should do all this research, and you're absolutely correct. I agree with you 100% that we start by studying the basics, and then we study the next mechanism, and then we study the next mechanism, and eventually we elucidate all of these Eastern principles and what are the biological mechanisms. Can we discover something like prana or chi? But here's the question: is what happens to the people in the meantime? How much time will that take? And I don't think it's an either or. I think we need to do both. It's just, for me personally, I find a lot more value, enjoyment, and I think that, like, I just worry about my patients. I worry about all these people who are addicted to video games, or all these people who are being loaded up with, like, psychotropic medications. And I think medication is good. I'm not anti-medication. But I do think that there are other mechanisms that we can harness that will impact someone's life this year, this month.
Where does that come from?
That's an interesting question. So I think part of it comes from my own understanding, or my own experience of how much a month, 3 months, or a year costs. So when I was an undergrad, I was a freshman in college, and I wanted to go to Harvard Medical School because I was an Indian kid and my parents were doctors, and everyone was screwed to Harvard, and you're so smart. Oh, arre beta, you're so smart. Go to Harvard. I was going to be the best doctor in the world and save lots of lives, right? And then what happened is I started failing my classes. And then, like, the damage from a single F, there's nothing you can do, right? So that transcript is forever. And so what I started to, and then it took me time, and I wound up there anyway, paradoxically. And then so what I really started to appreciate was, like, how much time matters. That 1 month, for someone who has a mental illness that is out of control, if you are in college and you lose 1 month because you have a depressive episode, that is light in the grand scheme of, we're talking about 12 months, 15 months for some people. Even 1 month, 1 failed test, 1 month you don't go to class, the trajectory of your life is altered. So for me, it took me I started med school at the age of 28, and it took me time to quote unquote catch up. I don't really see it that way. It's all the better of it. And so what I really recognize is when I work with my patients that they're living their lives, and their lives are passing them by. And frankly, like, I don't know that they can afford to wait for me to spend 15 years to do research. It's very noble, and I think it's great that people do that. And the reason that I'm able to do the work that I do is other people, thankfully, researchers have made, not that sacrifice, but they've done 15 years of research so that I can now read that paper. Like, think about how many years of effort goes into one publication that you or I just read, right? And then we apply it clinically. So I think that just an appreciation of time. And, like, I think patients don't have time. They can't afford to be sick, mentally ill. It's tough. So that's a big part of it.
Why do you put a heavier weight on time as opposed to the magnitude of impact that research could have longer term?
I think it's just personal. So
Well,
like
yeah,
I said,
that's what I'm saying. Why?
So I think for me, it's just an appreciation of that. And what I see and what we see in our community is, like, the reason I started doing the work that I was doing is I see a generation of people who are getting screwed by technology. And like what I see around me is that there's lots of people doing mindfulness research, which is great. And what I saw around me was that a lot of people are not, like, solving this mental health crisis. And I don't blame them. It's just that the institutions can't keep up. So if we think about, like, my academic mentors, which are awesome and brilliant, and even to this day, I am where I am because of them. Like, I even reach out to them on a monthly basis asking for guidance and stuff. So it's wonderful work, and it absolutely needs to be done. But I saw that there was work that was not being done, which is that if you look at the mental health right now, people say, there's, like, people are falling through the cracks. It's not cracks. It's like the Grand Canyon. The majority of people are falling through. So therapists are burnt out, overworked. I'm not sure that psychotherapy isn't part of the reason that I think we see an explosion in the field of coaching is because I think psychotherapy does not address, or we have not been trained to address a lot of issues in a very good way. So if we look at something like dating or getting promoted or achieving financial independence, what I was taught, and maybe this is a sample size issue, but I don't think it is. You know, what I was taught when I was training because in psychotherapy is if a patient comes in and says, "Can you help me get a girlfriend?" What do you think the right answer is?
No.
So
Do you
you're
want a
suppo-
girlfriend?
Huh?
Do you want to get a girlfriend?
Yeah. Why do you want a girlfriend?
Yeah.
Help me understand
Yeah,
where
sure.
that comes
Yeah.
from. So, like in the field of psychotherapy, we as psychotherapists no longer hold ourselves to the outcomes of our patients.
Right. I think it ties back to something you said at the beginning of this interview of we're in healthcare trained to go from negative 100 to 0 as opposed to 0 to 100.
And what happens is a lot of therapists are very good at going from 0 to 100. So even if you look at, for example, the Institute of Coaching at McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical School, Institute of Coaching started by psychologists, started by therapists who focused in positive psychology. So the reason that I went the road that I did is because I saw that there's like no one helping these people and that the existing institutions were not good enough. Student health services isn't good enough. If you go to a psychotherapist, I heard this so many times. Someone's addicted to pornography. They're addicted to video games. The mental health practitioner doesn't even ask them, like, do you play video games? It's not a part of our standardized interview. And so what happens is they meet clinical criteria for depression. They get some medication. They go home. They take their SSRI and they play video games all day. So what I saw was that there's a lot of people doing research, and it's amazing the kind of research that people are doing. But that if you look at any individual institution, whether it's the Office of the Surgeon General, it's great, they do amazing work there, but like they're not shouldering the responsibility of clinical care because that's not their job. An individual therapist is not shouldering the responsibility of fixing video game addiction. We have teachers are struggling. There's a lot of people. And so what's happened is our institutions are responsible for their thing. But what's happened is the problems are in those gaps, and those gaps are widening, which is why I think we have a mental health crisis. And this is what's so tricky is I don't think you can blame anyone. I mean, what is the responsibility of like a medical board? It's to do licensure. What is the responsibility of the Surgeon General's office? It's to raise awareness, do policy stuff. What's the responsibility of a clinician? It's to help this person. What's the responsibility of a researcher? It's to do research. But even though all of these people are doing these things, there is a lot of stuff that still needs to be done. And that's what I chose to focus on.
Yeah. I think you gave a really clear sort of architecture, blueprint, if you will, of the current system. But I'm curious about yourself, why you chose, like, all of it needs work, you're saying. But you chose the clinician work. So I'm curious why that speaks to you. So.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is I enjoy clinical work more than research.
Okay.
So my first PI at this place called the OSHA Research Center, I told her when I was going to med school, I was like, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't really like research. And she was like, keep an open mind. She says, you may like research. What you don't like is being a research assistant. Right, because I was her research. And she's a brilliant woman. So just an amazing mentor. So I just like clinical work. I like sitting with people. The other thing is I do believe it's part of my spiritual path. So I believe I have a dharma or a duty. The way that I conceptualize my life is like, I'm really lucky. So I got to spend 7 years studying yoga and meditation, like in all corners of India, South Korea, Japan. So I studied with a ton of different teachers, a ton of different gurus. I learned so much different stuff, really high value stuff, transformed my life from being like 2.5 GPA failure to like literally doing faculty at Harvard Medical School. So I found it personally very helpful. And then I also had the chance to train with amazing mentors. And I went to medical school at Tufts and like had some just brilliant psychiatrists that inspired me to become a psychiatrist, trained at these amazing institutions. And so what am I supposed to do with this, right? So I have this very unique advantage. The world has invested 15 years into me. And what am I supposed to do with this? So I did what most people usually do. So I'm complementary alternative medicine. A lot of people from famous people and CEOs, and I was in Boston, so HBS and MIT and all these like fancy people who are very wealthy started coming to me. And then I realized that there's like literally millions of people out there that no one is, and these people that were coming to me, like they have no shortage of people who want to help them, right? Because
cash practice. You pay out of pocket.
course.
You charge a lot of money, right? And so, but there's no one helping these other people. So I sort of view it as my dharmic, which means duty, or karmic goal to try to disseminate this information. The world has invested like 15 years of understanding the mind from both Eastern and Western perspectives. And am I supposed to use this to enrich myself and fly first class and go on vacations? No. Right? I'm supposed to disseminate this, try to help people in the world. And that's what really drives me.
Yeah,
Debt.
that's really interesting. Your
Has discovered us.
you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the benefits of spirituality, no, the benefits of Tai Chi having benefits within the spiritual and transcendental realm. What does that mean? Because you said you would touch on it. I'm curious.
Yeah, so I think one of the weirdest things, so let me ask you, so do we have scientific existence of the proof of thought? Or scientific proof of the existence of thought, sorry.
I mean, that's so abstract that I guess you can answer it both ways, I guess. Yes and
What
no.
would you say?
I would say yes.
How so?
Because you can speak to a human, you can give them commands, they can follow them. And
So, but
to
that's-
me, cognition is thought
Yeah, so, but how do we know that cognition exists?
because we can test it
How can we test it?
by asking someone a question, by giving them a command, and seeing an outcome.
Right, but so then what are we actually measuring? We're measuring words and actions.
Correct.
We can't detect a thought. So for all you know, so like, am I thinking right now?
Like, to me, the definition of a thought is a signal.
So you have an experience of thoughts, right?
Correct.
But we don't have, so we can do EEG, we can do fMRI, but this measures electrical activity, it measures blood flow to the brain. We can observe the impact of thought, but we actually have no, and maybe someone will prove me wrong. I've been asking this to a lot of neuroscientists and psychiatrists. We don't have any proof of the existence of thought. So we just can't measure thoughts, right? So I can't detect thoughts, I can't verify for you that thoughts exist. We have a lot of implications that are based on thought. How do
We have a strong, like, for example, we don't have randomized controlled studies that smoking is really problematic. But we have such strength in correlational data that we don't need the randomized controlled data.
Sure.
Same that I feel about thoughts.
Yeah,
There's
so-
enough correlational data that thoughts exist that I'm sufficient with.
I
evidence.
completely agree, but we have no proof. It was sufficient evidence, fine, for the faith of it, but we have no proof that thoughts actually exist. They have no material form. We don't know if they may have a correlation with electrical activity. We know we can stimulate certain parts of the brain to trigger some kinds of thoughts. That's how we know which parts of the brain do what. Because we ask people, what are you thinking when your amygdala is active? Oh, that's where anxiety or fear comes from.
Or injuries in those areas leading to deficits.
Absolutely, right? So if we have bilateral amygdala lesions, people have the stress-freest life on the planet. It's amazing. So if we kind of look at it, there's a whole dimension to existence, and this is where I go off the rails. There's a dimension to existence, which is kind of this dimension of thought and other things, which we actually don't, or not scientifically, there's no material to it. There's an energetic correlation, sure, there's tissue activation, sure, but that's biology. That's not actually the subjective experience of thought. So if you look at a lot of the way these spiritual techniques were developed, they weren't looking at the biology, and that's why they didn't develop instrumentation. They were looking at this subjective realm of experience. And in that subjective realm of experience, if you explore that and refine your mind and other parts of you, you are capable of experiencing things that will have all kinds of different effects. So you can gain knowledge. So this is sort of like the concept of like intuition, right? Which we also have some degree of access to. But what are the practices which hone your intuition, let's say? And then that's on the more believable or
Like
scientific level.
visualization, let's say.
Yeah. So there's visualization that maybe does something, and we have some of those mechanisms. We have intuition, which is different from like logical thinking. But then as you experience particular things in meditation, these are what I would call transcendent experiences because they're not of the mind. So they're not a thought or an emotion, but they are like a raw experience. And this can be transformative, and depending on what you believe or what your experience is, you can even like work on some weird manifestation. Now we're getting into Deepak Chopra realm, which I think some of that is legitimate, by the way. And then like you can start to affect change. So just as a simple example, I think a big thing that is responsible for my trajectory, which is a statistical vary improbability. So what's the likelihood of getting into medical school with like a 2.5 GPA? My MCAT score was pretty good. So there's still like a chance, like a 1 in 10,000. I looked at the, the AMC publishes that data. So I looked at it. So I'm like a 1 in 10,000 chance. And so there's just a lot of things that are statistical improbabilities.
I mean, the fact that the sperm chose the egg is
Yeah,
already
sure,
the most
sure.
wildest.
Statistical, yeah,
Yeah.
right? So for me, though, I started a spiritual practice, which my teacher, my guru, told me, like, if you do this, he said, do you want a spiritual practice that will help you in the material world or help you in the spiritual world? And I said, can I have one that does both? And he's like, absolutely, we can do that for you. So I think I really do believe that a lot of my success comes from the utilization of a mantra that harnesses this weird transcendental energy stuff. Now, when you come to science, we have some mechanisms of this, and it may not be so crazy. So we know, for example, that if you look at the healing power of psychedelics, first thing to understand is that psychedelics activate circuitry that exists in the brain, right? So psychedelic can't make something new. All we can do is activate receptors in a potentially non-endogenous way, but the circuitry's there, which also means that there are ways to theoretically activate it through practices like meditation, which is, I think, basically what goes on. And then we also know from science, or from studies, that deactivation of the default mode network correlates with like a sense of wellness. We can also predict what kind of trip you have and whether that will be healing for mental health concerns. So if you have a trip where you're just flying around, that doesn't actually lead to, or doesn't appear to lead to mental health improvement. If you have a trip where you have a sense of ego death, that's what correlates with mental health improvement. And so then we have some of these transcendental practices which dissolve your sense of identity. So like you have this sense of this is who I am, and with that comes all kinds of problems, because now if you're a person, I'm tall, I'm short, I'm this, I'm that. There's a bunch of spiritual practices that are designed to dissolve the ego, and in that process, once you dissolve your sense of self, then you get access to transcendental states. So some of this stuff we know is scientifically correct. Some of this stuff we have some scientific theory of mechanism, like default mode network, psychedelics, ego death, and meditation. And then even beyond that, though, the transcendental stuff, we have no idea what's going on there.
What is going on a practical level? Like, maybe not on a measurable level, but
Well,
how
I
would you
think it's
describe
actually-
it to me?
So I would describe it to you as the basic unit of existence is consciousness. And consciousness coalesces into energy, and energy coalesces into matter. So we can affect things in the material world by working on the level of matter, or we can access the consciousness level, which will then dribble down into manifestation in the real world. And I'll be the first to admit that that makes no scientific sense.
I think it does. Why not? It's the same way that, when people incorrectly
This coming
say,
from you, Mike?
What? Wait, no, why?
I just expected the
That's
staunchest.
the thing. That's why you think I'm a disbeliever, but I'm not. I think also you have to remember I'm not an allopathic physician.
Oh, that's your deal.
I'm an osteopathic physician. So that there's value here that's unmeasurable to some degree with our current tools, and that's why I don't always throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's the worst example, the worst saying ever. But when we incorrectly say depression is a disease of chemicals in your brain, right? That's not really what's going on, and our serotonin hypothesis has been disproven, all this stuff. And some people say, well, you have to take medications for it because you have a chemical issue, and if you take the medicine, it would change your neurochemistry and et cetera, et cetera. When you meditate, when you go through CBT, when you take certain actions in your life, those aren't medications, and yet it changes your neurobiology. Why is it unreasonable to say that when you experience this higher state of consciousness, you're not also impacting your neurobiology?
Oh, you absolutely are. So I think the only thing that is unreasonable is, and I'll be the first to say this, and apologies if I misjudged you. The only thing that I think is unreasonable is positing the existence of consciousness.
But these are just terms, and I hate that about science.
What do you mean?
We get caught up on the nomenclature of things instead of talking about what's actually going on. Like, two people can talk about the same thing and they'll argue about the word for 3 hours. It's like, who cares that it's called consciousness? There's clearly something going on, whatever we call it, It's clearly having some impact. We can't yet measure it, but there's something happening and we're observing it.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm with you there, like 100%. So I think just in my experiences of higher states of consciousness, and like that's hard to describe, but like we can sort of say that, you know, when you're asleep, there's a lack of awareness. When you're dreaming, there's a lower level of awareness, although there's mental activity. When you're consciously awake, there's also variations in the degree of consciousness and mental activity. When we see things like thought fusion, when someone is having a panic attack, their thoughts are forming their reality.
Yep.
So if you literally look at, I have a video that I made about this, so if you look at the states of consciousness, the more you think that your thoughts are real, the more mentally ill you will be. So if you look at someone who is in psychosis, their thoughts and the reality are one and the same. If you look at someone who has a panic attack, this isn't quite psychosis, but their thoughts are so likely to be true that they feel real. And then you have generalized anxiety disorder, then you have your breakup, where even in a breakup, if you have no mental illness, you will think, I will be alone for the rest of my life, right? And then what happens is we start to detach from our mind, we become more and more, we change our level of consciousness. So then you have everyday thought, where your thoughts are kind of real. Then you have things like the flow state, where you lose track of time, your mind is completely absorbed in one thing, and it's a different level of flow. And then even beyond flow, you have a no mind state. So flow is a one-pointed mind state. And so the more that we separate our awareness from our thoughts, the higher we go on the consciousness realm. And then there are even practices to go beyond flow. That's usually what we call a meditative state of dhyan. And then even beyond that is samadhi, which is temporary enlightenment. And these are these blissful or ecstasy kind of states where you also start to like see weird things and stuff like that.
Got it. Okay. Well, I thought that was an awesome conversation.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
a
for
lot, man.
enlightening me, because I think there's a lot of learning opportunities here for us.
It was awesome, Mike. Thank you so much.
We have room for part 2. Speaking of video games, I actually reacted and played some video games. Click here to check that out. And as always, stay happy and healthy.
Yeah, man. So, and what do you go by, friend?
Azrael's fine.
Okay. And so what are we Yeah, welcome.
Sorry, this is really confusing because there's like a delay.
Delay on stream?
Yeah, it's
Well, you should talk to me on Discord. Don't listen to what I'm saying on stream.
right.
So close the stream.
Yeah. There we go. That's
There we go.
better.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm new to this.
Yep. That's okay, man. Me and you both. I've been doing a little bit longer than you, but it's okay to be new to it.
Yeah, alright. Sorry, where were we?
I was just I mean, we weren't really anywhere. We were just starting.
All right.
So, Azrael, tell me a little bit. Thank you for coming on. And tell me a little bit about, what motivated you to come on stream today.
So, I've been wanting to come on stream for a while now. I think I've been trying for 6 months or so, but...
Oh, wow. Well, I'm glad you're here today.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to share my story and, I don't know, get support and all that.
Sure.
And, yeah, I want to talk about overanalysis and fear of failure, and I also have social anxiety and all that fun stuff.
Yep. So, yeah, can you tell us your story?
Yeah, so, I guess this year was my second year at university, and so it didn't start off great. I sort of took on more than I can handle, and I can say that how I dealt with it wasn't very good for my mental health. So I had a lot of courses, I had a lot of work to do and all that, and I started getting depressed, I wasn't performing as well, and so like it was getting sort of difficult. So I started like, oh shoot, you can't do some simple homework. Like, gotta get on this, and started beating myself up about it, calling myself a failure, and like started getting afraid of like, oh shoot, what if I can't do this? And it all sort of spiraled downhill from there. I think I met you in December was when I started watching your streams, and I've been making progress since then. I changed majors because I found that the one I was doing sort of felt meaningless, purposeless in a way. It's like, why am I even doing this? And so, yeah, I just sort of dropped everything and changed majors.
Okay.
And I think I have a lot of fear of failure because it's like, I sort of can't mess this up. Like, if I mess up university, then I mess up my life, pretty much. And it's like that for a lot of things.
What else are you afraid of messing up?
So, I tried getting a job this summer. I applied for a few places, and like I sort of gave up pretty quickly. I'm like, even if they hired me, like who's gonna want me working for them? Like I'm just gonna disappoint them and all that. I don't know. I felt like a pretty big failure, and sort of hid in my room for most this year, barely going outside or anything, just playing games and
What are you playing?
working on. So I play Minecraft. I play Starblast.io, which is an internet browser game. Kerbal Space Program.
Cool stuff.
I think those are my main games.
Cool. So, and so, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow. You were telling a really great narrative. So you were saying you're afraid of, you tried to get a job this summer. It was kind of hard to even kind of apply and stuff because you were concerned that people wouldn't even want to hire you anyway. So you kind of gave up a little bit easily.
Yeah. Yeah, I hardly felt in the state to like have a job. And
Okay.
I think it's like that for a lot of things actually.
Like what?
So there's the job. I'm supposed to be going to a dentist, which I haven't really done. I think I need to update my health card, and I don't know, I just have trouble talking to people, especially over the phone, and getting that all set up, and I'm afraid of talking to my family because I haven't really been completely honest with them with what was happening.
What is it that they don't know?
So they know that this year was particularly hard for me. They don't know that I failed my degree, and they do know that I switched majors, and my dad isn't particularly happy about that. He doesn't think I'll be able to do physics, which is what I switched to.
And what did you switch from?
I switched from marine biology,
Okay.
so
He doesn't think you're going to be able to do physics.
yeah. Which is fair, because physics is pretty hard, right?
Sure.
So,
Is your dad disappointed in you?
it's hard to tell. I know if I told him everything that maybe he would be. I think he is a little, yeah.
Okay. And so it sounds to me like you're afraid of telling people things because
Yeah.
they may be disappointed if they knew everything,
Yeah.
if they saw the real you.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you try to hide who you really are?
Yeah, I think so. I've been working on my mental health this summer, and I've been opening up a little more, but mainly just online. I don't trust anyone in real life with anything.
Okay. What about like a mental health provider? Like a therapist?
I looked into that, but they only have over the phone appointments because of COVID, and again, I have a fear of talking on the phone. Much rather go there in person.
Do they not do like video chat? They should do video chat. They do like phone? Like boomer phone?
I think so. I haven't looked into it that much.
Because most providers are shifting to telehealth, which usually involves video nowadays.
Okay.
But just something to think about. Okay. And so I'm not hearing anything. So I'm hearing about fear of failure. I'm getting the sense that you feel like you're inevitably going to disappoint people.
Yeah.
Are you disappointed in yourself?
I think, considering everything that's happened in my past and everything, I think I was sort of destined to fail. Like, there was definitely warning signs early on, and I didn't really know better, but I think it was something that was bound to happen just because I didn't really know what was going on.
What do you mean warning signs? What were your warning signs?
So, even before second year, like, I've been sort of ignoring problems. I know in high school, I had this fear of death, which, I think that sort of what happened was, so my brother went off to university, and I was in grade 9, and then I was sort of left on my own to figure out life, and I don't know, my brother was a big part of my life, and so everything sort of felt pointless and meaningless after that, and I started to, like, question why am I even here and all that. I think part of that was trying to navigate the family situation at home, because my parents are divorced, and it's sort of like a week-on, week-off thing where I switch houses, and my mother found someone else to live with who has a drinking problem and an anger problem, which don't go well together. So I think that's where my where I started getting addicted to video games, because it was an easy escape.
Sure. And what were
But I
you
think all
escaping?
that added up to what happened this year.
So you feel destined to fail.
Yeah.
Also sounds like your brother was a really stabilizing influence in your life.
Yeah, I'd say that.
It's hard to lose someone like that, especially at such a formative time of your life, like 9th grade. When did your mom start living with this other person?
Probably when I was 7 or 8.
Okay, so that sounds like that's been in your life for most of what you can remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember when my parents divorced, I was going into grade 4. My dad was driving me to school, and they're like, sorry, you're not registered with the school anymore. Apparently my mom had just, like, switched schools without telling anyone, and so it's like, oh, I'm at a new school now.
That feel.
It was frustrating. I didn't understand, like, her reasoning, why she didn't tell anyone, and it's like, I don't know, it's, yeah. my life's been pretty chaotic, I'd say.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking that it seems to me like your life isn't really something that you have a whole lot of control over.
No, not really.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're getting pushed around by events in life, like your parents' divorce, who your mom chooses to live with, your brother leaving, and so it sounds tough. It feels to me like you may be feeling, or it seems to me like maybe you're feeling powerless.
Yeah, I think so a little. It's like I don't know what to do anymore.
Yep. And let's...
So one of the things was like, I know probably around like grade 10 or so, when I was dealing with all this on my own, I'm like, yeah, I will. I sort of made a promise to myself that I would, despite how bad things would get, I would never consider suicide as an option. So I think that's helped. And sort of at grade 12, I was really anxious to get out of there, really anxious to go off to university and live on my own so I could just escape it all.
What were you escaping?
Everything, really. The whole situation at home and everything that's been going on. Switching back and forth between houses sort of means that everything that I own has to sort of fit in a backpack so I can carry it with me where I go. Escaping, the verbal, the anger and stuff of my stepfather. My mother tends to be over controlling. She likes to do everything for me, and I wanted to escape that as well. So, yeah, sort of everything.
Wow, man. That's a lot, bro.
That's a little.
Do you really feel that way, or are you just making a joke?
I don't think it's as much as some people go through.
Okay, so what does that mean for you? Some people have it worse than you do.
Yeah, so
You must construct additional pylons.
I think despite everything that happened, I should have still been able to find a way through, and I shouldn't have ended up where I am, sort of thing.
Where should have you ended up?
Should have passed this year at university, and I don't know, I should have just been destined for success. I was supposed to be successful.
And what got in the way?
Shitty life syndrome, I guess. I felt very lonely and isolated this year, which didn't help, and I never talked to anyone about how I was feeling or what I was going through because I was afraid of how they would judge me for it, and like they'd brush it off and say, oh, it's nothing, just keep going, like you'll get over it.
Have people told you that before?
I think my dad tends to, he's not very emotional. I mean, he is sometimes, but like, it's like, you just gotta do it, and like, ignore what you're feeling, just do it, right?
Yep.
And he was always pushing for my independence and all that, and being successful.
Yep. So, and where is your brother throughout all this?
He's in university. He's, I think, He graduated last year with a degree in software engineering. And I also have a sister. She's off in Alberta. She got married. She has just had a baby this summer. And she's doing pretty good. She's an accountant. And then there's me, and I failed.
Yeah, so it feels right, and so also practically, it sounds like you actually failed some coursework.
Yeah, I stopped doing my assignments.
Okay, so Azriel, I'm gonna point out a couple of things, and I'd love to ask you a few more questions. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I see something that really confuses me. So earlier, so recently you said that you were supposed to be successful, you were destined for success, but that something got in the way.
Yeah.
Right? But earlier when we were talking to you, you also said, like, when you applied for a job, you were just going to disappoint them, even if you got the job, and that you were destined to fail. Like, I asked you, like, what do you think about your current situation? You were like, well, now that I look back on it, I saw that, like, my failure was actually inevitable and started many years ago. So I'm going to point out to you, and we'll explore this, that there's, you decide, what was that? What did you just hear? What is it like hearing me point that out to you?
I think I'm still a little nervous for being on stream, and I'm just confused. Like, my thoughts are crazy.
Yep, I can imagine that, and that's what I'm pointing out to you. Is that I'm seeing a lot of conflicting thoughts. Because on the one hand, Azriel was supposed to succeed and everything was supposed to work out. And on the other hand, you sure got fucked in life.
Yeah.
And what are you feeling now?
I'm here in the shadows.
Powerless.
Yeah.
Hopeless.
And so here's what I'm seeing, Azriel. It wasn't supposed to be this way. This was the life. You were supposed to live this life. And then something happened, and then that life is now completely gone. And now you've shifted into this other life. And now this is what your future is. And every step you take on the road towards failure reminds you that the road towards success is getting further and further away.
Yeah.
What does that feel like?
I don't know, I don't know that it's like... I'm trying sort of everything to try and recover and get back where I was. I'm trying to avoid that road as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Can you?
Maybe, if I try hard enough.
Okay. That's a good answer. Maybe is actually the right answer. I don't know is also acceptable. So I think what I'm hearing, the first thing that I want to point out, Azriel, is that you have a deterministic view of life. Destined to fail or destined to succeed, it's not how life works, bro. Right? Life is a maybe.
Okay.
Right? Like, you just can't... Because, like, you were destined to succeed, and then what happened?
I failed.
Right? So, like, that... The idea of destiny in and of itself is false. Because, like, clearly it's not true. What do you think about that?
I don't know. That's sort of one of the debates I've been having, is like, you know, are things destined to happen, or do I have a choice? And it's like, well, I make the choice based on what I have to deal with right now, and it's like, I'm doing the best I can, so, and yet I'm still failing. So part of it seems like destiny.
Okay, sure. And so let me ask you a question. So if you were destined to succeed and you ended up failing, is it possible to be destined to fail and end up succeeding?
You must construct additional pylons.
I'm here in the shadows.
Maybe.
Does it go both ways?
I hope so.
I hope so too, right? But that's like, it's interesting because if we want to be scientific about it, and if things were destined and then you ended up failing, like maybe even though you're hurtling towards failure 100%, I actually think you could be okay. Like, I'm not kidding. What do you think about that?
I think I could be too. But it's gonna take a lot of work for sure.
Yeah, I think it'll take work. I also think that it's going to take more than work. What do you think about that?
What more is there than work?
Luck, my bro.
That's true.
You require more Vespene gas. You require more Vespene gas.
I don't know if I really.
You require more Vespene gas.
I don't know how I feel about luck.
Good. When you say I don't know how I feel about luck, what does that mean?
Cause like, if it's just luck, then why am I able to influence things?
Okay, so there's an important word there. If it's just luck,
Yeah. So it's not just luck.
it's not just luck, but it's also not just you. Right, so I think this is the hard thing about life, is that we're in control of our actions, but we're not in control of the results of our actions. I can pick up the phone and I can talk to someone. I can talk to my parents about how I failed this class. I'm not in control of how they respond.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And how does it feel to not be in control of how they respond?
Face crystal.
It's hard because I want to make them understand, but I can't.
Yeah, so that too, you can't make them understand, but you also can't make them not understand. Like, them understanding is not determined by you. You can talk to them, right? But there's no guarantee that they're going to understand. So what is it like to pick up the phone and tell someone that you failed? The correct answer is it's fucking terrifying.
Yes.
That is the right answer.
Okay.
Right? And that's what you feel. So now, Asriel, the question that we get to is like, how do you as a human being act in the face of complete terror?
I hide in my room.
Which is also the correct answer. This is where there's a part of you that's gonna want to say, I overcome it with strength and internal fortitude. No, that's not what happens. When we face abject terror, we get our asses kicked. That's what happens, man. It crushes us.
Yeah.
And then you wind up where you are now, which is in your room playing Minecraft all day, avoiding your responsibilities, and being crushed by terror.
Yeah.
Now comes the next question. Is that okay?
No.
Incorrect. What do you think about that?
feel like despite everything that's going on, I should be able to do something. And I shouldn't be hiding in my room. So when you say this is the right thing to do, I don't understand that.
Good. That's what we're here for. Right? So, like, so is it the right thing to do? No. Is it the expected thing to do? Absolutely. Can we blame you for doing it? Absolutely. I mean, sorry, like, not really, right? Like, we can't, you know, like, in a sense, like, I don't blame you for responding the way that you have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, it's understandable. And I think we've got to start there, right? So I think one of the biggest things about taking control of your life, Asriel, is starting where you're at instead of where you should be. Think about this with me for a second, okay? We live our lives and we come up with solutions for our life based on where we should be, not where we are. And then we're confused when it doesn't work. And it's like, man, you know, I can't even come up with an analogy, but do you see how ridiculous that is?
Yeah.
It's like, I should be able to fly like a bird, so I'm going to flap my wings. And, like, then I get upset with myself for not being able to fly. Right? It's crazy, because you keep on talking about what you should be, like you should be able to overcome that fear. Well, like, if you were a dude who could overcome that fear, then you would have done it by now. So, okay, you can't overcome fear. Here's the wild thing. Is I think that you can still be successful as long as you acknowledge that you're fucked up in some way.
All right.
Right? Because then at least, like, you know what you're playing. It's sort of like, you know, like, I don't know, like, I don't know if you've ever played Dark Souls, but, like, you know, I kind of think about, there's a class in Dark Souls called Deprive, which is like you start the game naked with a club. And if you think, like, you can also start the game in, like, chainmail armor with a sword and shield, and then you can play Dark Souls, like, pretending that you have a sword and shield and armor, and then you're gonna lose. But if you, like, start with the get-go, which is like, I'm a naked dude with a club, you can actually play the game, but you just have to, like, accept that you've got a club instead of, like, armor and a sword. You can accept that something about the way that you were raised, and we're gonna get into this, has made it hard for you to be confident in yourself and have faith in yourself. That I don't think is your fault. So no wonder, like, you don't have, like, so you say, I'm just going to disappoint them? Like, where the fuck, what do you base that
on? Past experience.
Exactly. Right? But here's the thing. I don't know if you know this, but when human beings are born, it's not, like, natural that they believe that they're inevitably going to disappoint people. Like, people have done studies on the brain, and there's no, like, I'm going to disappoint everyone in life center of the brain. We're taught that we're going to disappoint people. So the beliefs that you have about yourself are very reasonable, even if they're wrong. What do you think about that?
I think that makes sense. I don't think they're wrong.
Yep. I know that you, and they're not wrong for you, right? Because you're not a dumb guy, and why do you believe the things that you believe?
Because I learned them.
Absolutely. Because of past experience. Now, here's the thing. Does past experience determine future experience?
No.
You sure about that?
Yeah, I guess it could. It depends, like, if it's the same person, then yes. But if it's a different person, then things could be different.
Okay. Are you the same person you were yesterday?
No. I don't
Okay,
think so.
right? So that's kind of interesting because what you're shaking, like what you're doing there, if I were to accept your answers, what you seem to be suggesting to me is that you do have some limited control over your future.
Yes.
How does that sit with you?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So now we get to the important question. Is it enough?
Well, I'm figuring that out now. Because with everything I'm trying, I hope it's enough.
That also is the right answer. So there's a subtle shift in your